morning, and welcome back to the second day of the Wisconsin Counties Association Virtual Legislative Exchange. My name's Lance Plimmel, Chair of the Wisconsin Counties Association Board of Directors. It's a pleasure so many members of the Wisconsin County government family are joining us here today. The meeting is officially called to order. At this time, I ask that you please rise and join me in the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. We have a very full agenda this morning, so with nothing further ado, we will call this meeting to order and get started with today's program. Thank you.
Good morning, and thanks again for joining the WCA Legislative Exchange. Each year, one of the highlights of our legislative conference is our legislative roundtable, where we have the opportunity to hear directly from the state's 4 legislative leaders. While the roundtable typically occurs in the WCA living room at the concourse, just like about everything else over the past year, adjustments have had to be made. So while we're joining you virtually today, I'm incredibly proud to say that we're joined by all 4 legislative leaders. With us this morning are Assembly Speaker Robin Voss, Assembly Minority Leader Gordon Hintz, Senate Majority Leader Devin Lemieux, and Senate Minority Leader Janet Bewley. On behalf of all of county government and the Wisconsin Counties Association, I want to thank our legislators for joining us today and thank you for the work that you do on behalf of all Wisconsinites. So with that, let's jump right into a couple of questions. Of course, the item consuming all the oxygen in Madison right now is the state's biennial budget. Governor Evers recently introduced his budget, and it now heads to the legislature for consideration. Any of the 4 of you can feel free to jump in first, but what's your reaction to the governor's 2-year spending plan?
Boy, we're just going to leave this open-ended. I guess I'll jump in first. Thanks, Kyle. Appreciate being here on this, my first time on the Counties Association Roundtable. Appreciate all the work that the counties do as a branch and arm of state government. But in answering your question, I was just very disappointed in the governor's budget. It was a repeat of his budget from 2 years ago. In fact, it was probably even a little worse, with almost 10% increase in spending, $8 billion increase in spending, over $1 billion in new taxes. And probably the worst is that it relitigated almost every policy item from the last decade was stuck in there, overturning every policy item. So a lot of divisive policy that was put in the budget. Under Republican leadership over the last 10 years, we've went from a rainy day fund of virtually nothing to almost $1 billion. We've had balanced budgets, surpluses, held the line on taxes. This is something that served the state of Wisconsin very well for a decade. Even despite a pandemic, the governor signed the budget that the legislature put forward 2 years ago. And despite the pandemic, we are still projected to have a surplus at the end of this budget. So just to pivot and transition away from the responsible track that Wisconsin's been down for the last decade is sort of disappointing.
Okay, my turn. And also I echo the majority leader's sentiments about the Counties Association. I regret that we can't all be in your living room at the concourse. But this is an important event for us, and we are all, I know, very glad to be able to speak with you all. I, of course, take a different view of the governor's budget. I think it truly reflects the needs of the state. It is a document that mirrors the needs of the people of the state of Wisconsin. And regarding any policy that may be in there as a reflection of what could have happened a decade ago. A decade ago, it did not go over well. It was not received, particularly the components of Act 10. It was not received well. It was very, very decisive then. So I'm not surprised that there's some pushback about these items now. I think that one of the most important aspects of the governor's budget, it deals with the entire budget and all of the needs of all of the people of the state. We can't pick and choose who we want to serve or where we want to go. We have a large state that's very diverse. And when you think about the needs of the state, they were laid bare by COVID. So we are in a bit of a different world now than we were even 2 years ago. So I think we have to look at what does the state need and how do we start from that and do the very best we can to deliver.
Speaker Voss?
Well, good morning. Thank you to everybody also from WCA for being on the line. I look back fondly on my days on the Racine County Board. I spent a decade there, so it's always nice to reconnect with friends, especially those who are delivering a lot of the services that the state of Wisconsin needs. Senator Lemieux was exactly right. Disappointing is probably the most accurate word as I look at this budget. Governor Evers has this term that he used as we tried to deal with pandemic relief in AB1, where he called items poison pills, right? Now, I don't think saying that you don't have to have mandatory vaccines or that the legislature should be involved in decision making is a poison pill, but that's what he called it. But I think if that's the nomenclature that we're going to utilize, repealing Act 10, making it easier for people to cheat in elections, making it harder to own a firearm, I mean, all the things that are bedrock conservative principles, he put those in his budget. Those are actually poison pills that he wasn't serious about governing. He's not serious about doing anything but appealing to a very far left part of his primary electorate. To me, this was the clearest indication that Governor Evers is going to run for re-election and that he's focused only on the people on the liberal side of the spectrum to try to get their votes. And that's why the budget looks like it does. We have actually got a stellar record. I mean, Senator Bewley basically said somehow that 10 years ago, we had an issue with Act 10. Yeah, change is hard. It was really difficult to get the state in a good financial position. I remember we had record deficits when the Democrats were last in control. We now have had record surpluses. In the governor's budget, it goes from a surplus to $1 billion deficit if we would pass this document as presented. So just if you think about yourself as a county elected official, would you ever vote for a budget that increases taxes, increases spending, and at the end creates $1 billion deficit that you have to solve in the next budget? That's totally irresponsible. So I certainly think we're going to do a better job. We're going to throw out his entire budget like we have done before. We'll start from scratch. We will end up building a budget that focuses on our priorities and the ones of the state of Wisconsin, not relitigating things that have clearly proven to be successful or are incredibly divisive. No purpose in doing that inside the budget. So I'm actually pretty optimistic. I think we have a great relationship with the Senate. I think we have two caucuses who are pretty united in our belief that we're not going to raise revenues. We're going to keep spending in check. We're going to invest in things that matter, but we're certainly not going to do a liberal wish list like Governor Evers put together.
Well, obviously, I have some disagreement with the speaker and the majority leader, and plenty of agreement with the majority leader or minority leader of the Senate. I too want to thank the Counties Association and wish that we were in person. I think the important part, and we're seeing it more than ever, is the importance of the partnership with state and local government, especially in times of the pandemic, and the important role of county public health agencies. As we've kind of seen, it's been a real challenge, I think, with the federal government and then state government, and then unprecedented rollouts with everything from testing to vaccines, and appreciate all of you and the role that you've played in trying to make sure that all of our constituents are getting the assistance that they need and the questions that they have answered. In that light, I think Governor Evers' budget really balances the immediate challenge that we face. Obviously, we're talking about July 1st going forward, and I hope that we're in a much better place when this budget actually begins. But it's, balancing the real challenges that we have right now in terms of the fact that we know that the economic recovery from COVID is going to take longer than probably the public health impact. We know that some parts of the economy are doing great, but there's been a disproportionate impact on certain sectors. And I think his budget really reflects that, and also continues to invest in a brighter future going forward. The reality is the biggest things that state government does are long-term, infrastructure, investment in education, the kind of things that it isn't just about 2 years, it's about 20 years. When someone starts 4K, they're in school for the next 14 years. And so you can't have cyclical budgets that go up and down. And I think building off of the record investment that we saw in education, in special education, in the last budget, the first real increase in transportation funding that came with Governor Evers' election and budget is something that we're going to continue to build off of. So I think the balancing between the immediate recovery from COVID, the additional money invested in small businesses, the recognition that childcare is going through an immediate crisis, the additional funding and proposals for more local option revenue. I think that there's a recognition that the 20-year stagnation with shared revenue is unlikely to change anytime soon, and that if our communities are going to be able to have the resources to be able to provide basic services and invest in quality of life, they're going to need some additional resources. And I'll say this about the governor's budget. It certainly is aspirational in some of the things that it includes. I'm sure he didn't think that all the policy would be maintained in the budget. When Governor Walker proposed policy in the budget, it was removed before some of it was added back. I think, a lot of the bills and issues that the governor includes in the budget will be proposed as standalone legislation. But he's using the bully pulpit to get attention on these issues of about Wisconsin the way it could be. And I think that's important to get to the voters. The criticism about overall spending, I'll just say this. The governor has put down investments in a lot of priorities in the state. And if my colleagues on the other side, are concerned about overall spending, they should highlight what they don't think should receive investment, what they don't think is a priority, and make that clear to the public. Which of the things that Governor Evers has funded is not important.
All right. So I think, clearly in an era of divided government, I don't think anyone expects that the legislature is going to adopt the governor's budget as introduced. But with that being said, are there specific areas or items within the governor's proposed budget that you believe the legislature and the governor can find common ground on? And Senator Lemahieu, we'll start with you.
You're going to make me lead off on every one of these? All right, I'm up.
Just the first two.
I'm up to the task. Since Speaker Voss highlighted his decade on the Racine County Board, I should probably highlight my 9 years. I didn't quite make it a decade on the Sheboygan County Board. So shout out to Chairman Koch and Supervisor Wagner and all my friends who are still serving on the Sheboygan County Board. With that being said, in answer to your question, when someone proposes a budget that increases spending by 10% and almost 10%, $8 billion increase in spending, well, obviously there's a lot of good things in that budget. And when you start throwing money around, there's a lot of cool things that you can highlight. But I think probably the main area, or maybe I'll couch it down to about 3 or 4 areas which I think are important, maybe not to the extent where the governor funded them at. But number one is broadband expansion. In the last budget, we made some substantial increases in broadband expansion. I'm the former chair of the Utilities Committee, where we were working on that last session. Especially in light of the pandemic, we've now known and heard how important broad, high-speed internet can be in more remote areas where people have to work remotely or found the advantage of working remotely or trying to educate their kids if their schools were not opening for them. So I think that's one area where we can make some substantial investments in broadband expansion to make sure that that last mile of internet service starts getting reached all around the state, especially in the most rural areas of the state. I think another area would be some of his investments in workforce development. I think that's important in the tech colleges, things like that, to make sure we continue to invest in workforce development. Another program that he included was a budget motion that Senator Mark Line and I worked on last session with one-time money in the LRIP program. Unfortunately, in the last budget, the governor vetoed that down, the amount from 90 million to 75 million. That was a one-time proposal that was put into the last budget to help, towns, counties, municipalities sort of get caught up on some of their road projects. And I see that he included that in this budget as well. I think that was a great program. And if funds are available, I think we can especially even though he put it in as, again, but using one-time funds, and we have a surplus at the end of this budget, I think it's important to invest those in one-time funds and not create a deficit, structural deficit going on. So that might be something that we're looking at just to make sure we're continuing to invest in infrastructure. And he made substantial increases in health services again, like we did in the last budget. We invested heavily into nursing home reimbursements, into personal care workers and things like that to continue to address those needs in the state of Wisconsin. I think is important, especially in light of the pandemic.
Senator Bewley, common ground?
Well, I think that it's clear that we want to be able to have the counties have the wherewithal to do what they are mandated to do. And how we get there is one of the things that I think is difficult. I think it's very clear that local units of government are stymied when it comes to covering mandated services, and that they are asking for our help. Now, we have a number of ways to do that. I think the one that many of the counties are telling me, and I represent a lot, I have parts of 11 counties, and they are saying we need the flexibility to be able to have a sales tax. Now, that's not popular with Republicans. I understand that. Then we need to be able to find a way to tell the counties they will have access to the revenue that they need to provide mandated services. And it's as simple as that. And because they're stymied, they are in many cases in very dangerous fiscal situations because they are borrowing for operating expenses. Nobody should be put in that position. I think also that we do understand the broadband need. I think that that is very critical. I think that we're reaching a place where we're going to have to come up with more ideas, because when we provide grants and require partnerships with a willing provider, we're getting to those miles where the providers don't want to go there. I mean, they just don't want to go there. So they're just going to say, no, thanks. And there's no one else to ask, because you can't jump 100 miles away and see if you can connect a line. So we're going to have to come up with ways to consider why they won't go and how we can correct those, find other providers that, and the other thing is I think we have to look at policy in general when it comes to broadband. And we have limitations because providers own their own network of wires. They own it, and that's not how we do in electricity. In electricity, we have a grid. With the internet, every provider owns their own line, which is somewhere along the line, we're going to have to figure out a way to work with the federal government and come up with a way to get around that. And I think that we also know that people need healthcare. They need access to healthcare. And depending upon where you are in the state, you are going to have a different level of service at a different cost. And we have to make corrections for that. We still have to do something about insulin. I mean, there are very, very basic things that we have a responsibility to do.
Mr. Speaker, items of common ground you think you can find with the governor?
Well, I think the most important thing for us to do is to first decide what revenues we're going to have that we get to choose where to put, right? So starting out, in my opinion, we're not going to raise any new revenues, right? We're not going to do the electricity tax that he proposed. We're not going to expand welfare. We're not going to have a tax on marijuana. All those things are DOA, not going to happen. But then you say, okay, what money we have left? What are the important priorities that we have? Number one, Devin, and I think everybody is right, we're going to invest in broadband. It's in the night of the governor's televised address, right, from the basement. So we definitely are going to have an investment in broadband. I agree that there are other things we can look at. I think that if the counties, one example that I really would like us to look at is to make sure that we are able to help fund the PSAPs and some of the things that are a basic core function. They're incredibly expensive. That's not something that probably most counties can afford to do on their own. Something that I'd like to look at, I know we have our speakers task force on racial disparities. One of the ideas is what are we going to do with the basic concept of body cameras and how we're going to fund that. I know for Racine County alone, just to maintain the amount of storage necessary is a huge financial cost for a single county. So that's something I'd be open to looking at that I know the governor has interest in too. So I think there are areas that we are going to find common ground, but the first important thing that we have to do is to realize that our revenues are much more limited than if you're going to raise taxes and expand welfare and, and tax electricity and all the things that the governor did to be able to pay for his wish list. And then lastly, before I turn it over to Gordon, the capital budget, the governor proposed a record amount of borrowing. There is nowhere near that level of appetite for borrowing to build office buildings and things like that. I mean, the very idea that the governor does not have a plan to return workers back to the buildings we already own, but we're going to propose to build a brand new office building in Milwaukee, a brand new office building in Madison, have all kinds of additional office space when we're not even sure what the world's going to look like. I cannot imagine those going through. So I think that, I think Gordon said it was aspirational. I would say it was more fantasy based, that a lot of the things in this budget are not based in any sort of reality. We don't even know how people are going to be working, and yet we want to invest billions of dollars into a system that we're not even certain is real. So I think that we have to start with the very basics of what government has to do, and that is take care of basic functions like public services, make sure that counties are funded for the things that we mandate them to do. I would be much more interested in doing that than to kind of add on and create additional things that we probably can't pay for with the limited resources that we have.
Representative Hinz?
Yeah, again, I think some of the debate is going to be over what the level of investment is. I mean, Governor Evers was able to move the state, even with Republican control of the legislature, really away from what 8 years brought us in terms of budget by, I think, a starting place that made significant investments. And even though I thought the investments fell short of where they could be, the needle was still moved in terms of special education funding, overall education funding, and transportation investment. But I'm encouraged. I mean, I'll focus on the positive. There should be nothing political or partisan about broadband expansion. I think the pandemic has highlighted certain deficiencies that we have as a state, whether you're talking about virtual education or telehealth. For a lot of people in rural communities that simply did not have the same opportunities that those who are hooked up have. And I think it kind of highlighted the need to probably move faster, move more, have a plan, if it's not just in 2 years, but multi-year, for us to keep moving. I know that we've made investments, but this is something that I think we all recognize. And I think, there are sort of two tracks. What are the most immediate needs that we have in regards to being in the midst of the pandemic, and then the recovery, and then obviously the long-term investments. And it's only February right now. When finance is making decisions in May, there may be things that we know about what needed investments there are going to be in a number of different topic areas. And so I do think there are areas of agreement. Transportation is another thing that should not be partisan. Usually it comes down to the funding, but you've got to recognize that we're not going to kick the can down the road, that we need to make sure that we're making the kind of investments that are necessary. Unemployment insurance yesterday was, anytime that we can get some progress is great, but obviously the funding for the kind of infrastructure upgrades are something that's going to be important, and that should be nonpartisan. And so hopefully we can move the needle, but I do think we're going to need answers on which investments aren't a priority for Republicans if we're going to see criticism of the governor's investment. This is the starting point, and hopefully the discussion ahead is how do we best meet these things together.
So
Kyle, I'm going to interject. When we're in the living room, we have the freedom to sort of deliberate a little bit. Is that okay?
Absolutely. Jump in anytime.
Let me be first. Yeah, I just want to ask my colleagues, if we are at a point, and I'm going to talk about from the county's perspective, if we are at a point where expenses are going up and revenue is staying absolutely the same, what are they supposed to do? If we are not looking at finding ways to increase our revenue as E is just going up, 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 up. How are we supposed to assist the counties? All we can do right now, and all we do right now, is give them little dribbles of increased GPR, which is a zero sum. We can't do that forever. But expenses for out-of-home placement for children is skyrocketing. They have no money, and they have no way to get money. They're cutting things like library funding, and 4-H they are out of money. And we are saying, I am saying, I believe the state needs to give them alternatives. Now, I understand your reluctance to raise, but what about create? What about identify those areas where other states have fees or taxes? Why can't we, where we haven't done it before? Why can't we help out the counties and give them some powers to be able to get revenue?
Well, I guess I would say from the first standpoint is, how about if we get creative and try to stop some of the expenses that are unnecessary? I mean, we have this crazy lockdown where the reason that we are seeing increased out-of-home placements, the reason that we are seeing increases in domestic violence, in child abuse, is because we have this policy which people basically are trapped inside their homes. Right? We have people around the state who have made decisions that are not based on science, that are not based on data. We do not hear anything from Governor Evers on how he is going to open up schools. That was one thing that was woefully deficient in any kind of discussion in the governor's budget. I don't favor giving more money to people who are just going to keep doing the same failed policies of the past. So I do not think that we need to give more revenue options to local governments. I think we need to figure out, come to us and tell us how we can reduce spending. Where do we have the combination of services? In certain areas, we had one proposal to try to combine some county offices inside the last couple budgets, and it was met with fierce resistance because people wanted to keep what they always had. Well, if that's what they want to keep, they've got to figure out how to find other ways to save. The idea that we're just going to keep increasing the cost of government, I mean, it has taken us well over a decade to get us out of the top 10 tax states. And I understand from your perspective, that's not something that's laudable. You want to be higher taxed. That is something that I just fundamentally disagree with. You think it's better to have the government collect the money and give it out to certain people based on whether or not you like what they're doing with it. I like the idea that they can go to the voters and they can ask their own permission. They can convince people in their local jurisdiction if they want to raise their own revenues and spend it as they see fit. Now, you're often somebody I know who points out how many referenda pass. Well, frankly, that's exactly the process that we want to go through, where people get the right to tax themselves, not have a politician who lives in a faraway place in the state somehow say it's okay to have taxes on the people that never even get to vote for them.
So a couple times now we've referenced transportation. It seems like in every state budget, in some ways it feels like Groundhog's Day, right? Transportation's always at kind of the top of the discussion list. And then the last budget, as Representative Hintz mentioned, there were additional transportation revenue enhancements included in that budget. The governor's proposal doesn't include any new transportation revenue. So I think the question, and we'll start with you, Senator Bewley, is how do you see the transportation budget playing out? Do you see any new revenues? I believe the governor referenced last budget as kind of a down payment on infrastructure. So where do you see the legislature going as far as infrastructure and transportation investment in
well,
this?
I don't see the current legislature going anywhere with it, to be honest with you. I think that the budget, while it doesn't have any new revenues, it continues with some of the things that have happened before. I think that we have to finish some things in Milwaukee. I know that we do, and that a lot of the major highway things have been put on hold, but we've got to get some of those done. But I think that when it comes to helping the counties, again, I believe that we need to look at what their needs are, and I think that many of the expenses that they have, like roads, we've deferred for so long that we have to not only do what we should do in any given year, we have to do what we haven't done for 30 years at the county level. We can't do that with the amount of revenue we have, period. So if we want to keep going backwards, as the rest of the state has more people, more needs, to simply say that we're going to cut, how far do you cut? How far down do you go? How many years back do we go? Because when we're not meeting the needs, we're going back in time. The need for out-of-home placement happened well before COVID. We can't blame everything on COVID. We can't blame increased road expenses, deferred maintenance, floods on Democrats spending too much money. We can't do that. I believe Democrats believe that we need to find creative ways to get the things done that the people of Wisconsin need. And we have to stop saying you don't need it. You really, really don't need that. That's what we're telling counties. That's what we're telling individual families, that somehow they've done something wrong and that we aren't going to reward that behavior. As a matter of fact, we're going to cut what we give you. That's an attitude that I don't think the people or the counties of our state deserve.
Senator Lemminger, you referenced the $75 million multimodal supplemental program that you were one of the architects of last budget. The governor did include that again in his budget. We're very hopeful that will make its way through the legislature. Beyond that, though, where do you see the transportation budget going from your caucus's perspective?
Right. So, we're only a week out since the governor introduced his over 1,000-page budget. So I've been sort of looking at it at sort of the 30,000-foot view at this point. But in regards to transportation, and not really digging down into all the details yet, since it is such an expensive wish list. But I think the part of the budget that might potentially be closest to how the governor introduced it might be transportation, since there are no revenue uppers. I think we'll be focusing on programs like you said, like LRIP, GTA, Bridge Aid, things like that, to make sure local governments have the resources they need. Programs that we made investments in the last 2-3 budgets to make sure that those programs are increasing. I think it was important to see the 94 East-West included in the budget, because that's such a main corridor to our state. So we're going to need to fix that bottleneck in the interstate system at some point, because that's such a main artery to commerce and transportation in our state. But no, I think we'll be focusing on maintaining our roads, giving local governments the tools that they need. But yeah, it's pretty early in the process yet.
Representative Hinz?
Well, I certainly appreciate the county's support for Governor Evers' budget. I know that transportation, I know that you guys put out a joint release recognizing the investments in local roads, bridges, other infrastructure that this budget provides. It's not the increase of, I think, 10% or 8% that we had in the last budget, but it is an overall 2% increase in general transportation aids. I think the important part that we need to recognize with infrastructure, even if there's less driving right now because of the pandemic, we can't wait for the crisis to get worse. We know in a lot of the assessments of the future of our infrastructure over the last decade, the legislature was sort of non-responsive. And the problem with kicking things down the road is a lot of things were becoming due at the same time, whether it was smaller bridges that needed to be replaced for bigger agriculture equipment in smaller places, or bottleneck infrastructure that impacts all of us in some of the interchanges and work that we needed in our majors program. And so it's really about thinking about the future and moving things forward. I think the governor, besides the big investments in infrastructure, also increased some funding in transit, which is obviously an important part of our communities, and then also some of the multimodal things. And then in terms of the responsibility that I know my colleagues on the other side often seek, the bonding that is proposed in transportation for in this budget by Governor Evers is only prioritized for the most eligible projects. Not a wish list of stuff, but things that are certainly most important. 162 million for major highway projects, 40 million for the 94 East-West project that Senator Lemahue just mentioned, and then another, harbor, freight rail, number of the other things. So the slightly more than 500 million that we're seeing in bonding in this transportation budget is more prioritized and isn't the kind of sort of blank check. And so I do think that the discussion that we've had about overall transportation funding with the kind of fuel efficiency going up, more electric vehicles, stagnant or not keeping up with inflation, increase in revenue means that we're probably going to have to revisit long-term transportation funding, every 2 years or every 4 years. My guess is over the next decade, especially with changing revenue, changing priority in vehicles, increased age of population, we're going to have to be considering and have that conversation going on. I know the starting point in this discussion doesn't look at new revenues after an investment increase that we saw in the last budget, but it has to be part of the overall narrative. I think the governor's budget keeps us moving forward, and I do hope that that's something that we get agreement on, and I am encouraged, at least by some of the comments I heard from Senator Lemahue.
Mr. Speaker?
It is interesting. I heard Senator Bewley say that we have to be creative and be able to deal with our transportation problem. Well, there are 50% of the people on this panel who actually were creative and voted to increase funding for transportation for the first time in a decade. We didn't have any Democrat support on that, as we wanted to create more revenues to be able to help increase funding for local roads and local transportation systems. So, I think we have been creative, so I think that's a good thing going forward. Looking at what's happened over the course of the past year, I do not support an increase in transit funding. We have seen trillions of dollars being spent by the federal government and billions of those going to empty buses operating literally around because people are not in major cities going out. So we have empty buses being funded at the federal level. I don't think with a shortage of revenues at the state level that we have the dollars to invest in those kind of systems with increases. I'd rather have that money go into roads and bridges and infrastructure that, as Gordon just said, is kind of the thing that should be a bipartisan solution. So I hope we have the ability to do that. I also know that as we are looking for areas to put into, transportation has been something that Gordon is right about this too. We need to have a longer term discussion, but that's not going to happen with this governor at this time. We certainly know that we have to find a better way to fund our roads than just a simple gas tax, which is, if you look at what's happening at the federal level now, especially with President Biden trying to use his climate change agenda to, make people not drive a traditional gasoline-powered vehicle, that is going to be really challenging for funding our roads. That's going to be a challenge for the counties to be able to figure out how we're going to pay for local infrastructure without the revenues coming from the state. So we do have to have that discussion, but it's not going to happen under Governor Evers.
Thank you. Speaker Voss, we'll have you start with this question. One item, and we've referenced it kind of briefly here, that's of particular interest to our membership is the proposal that would allow counties to increase their sales tax by 0.5% with approval from voters at referendum. The proposal received widespread support from the Milwaukee business community as well as from local governments, but not a lot has really been articulated yet from the legislature on this item. So the question to you, Mr. Speaker, we'll start with you, what are your thoughts on this proposal, and what's the likelihood of this proposal or a similar proposal that would mandate that a portion of new revenue be dedicated to property tax relief could be adopted either in this budget or in separate legislation sometime this session?
I love you, Kyle. Zero. There is no chance this is going to happen. It is dead on arrival. Never going to happen. So I think the problem that we are looking at, especially in Milwaukee, is systematic problems where they have made bad decisions over decades that they now do not have the courage to solve, and they want to go to the taxpayers for an easy, quick fix to say, we don't want to put in the systemic reforms that are needed, just give us more money. That is just not going to happen. So I think that, you look at how some counties have done things regarding the sales tax. I mean, look at Walworth County, where they chose to enact the sales tax, and every single dollar of sales tax revenue that they generate, 100% goes into property tax relief on your property tax bill. That is not the norm around the state of Wisconsin with people who already have the 0.5% sales tax. It really was used to increase and fund additional spending. So the idea that we're going to have part of it go for property tax relief, that's a cute way for people who want to raise taxes to make it seem like they're doing something to help deal with the tax situation. But the reality is that very rarely has that ever occurred. So, I am not somebody who believes that we need to take more money from people who have been suffering in the pandemic and give it to government because they don't have enough, especially with, as I mentioned before, the trillions of dollars that are being borrowed from our kids and grandkids and foreign investors from the federal government. There seems to be more than enough federal money that's raining down on local municipalities and the state. We certainly don't need to raise new revenues.
So, Mr. Speaker, just a follow-up on that. I guess regardless of the opinion on the sales tax itself, I think everybody on this panel would acknowledge that the property taxes in this state are too high. And eventually we have to do something on property tax relief. So I think from our perspective, this would be one way to start easing the burden on property tax and move it to a different revenue source. So I think that's a discussion we hope to continue with you and the rest of the panel as we move forward.
So just Kyle, but the proposal is not to have all of the sales tax revenue go into property tax relief. It's really mostly about more spending, isn't it?
The current proposal from the governor does not require any type of tax relief. I think we understand that's a critical component to both your caucus and likely Senator Lemmyhue's caucus. So we are open to those discussions. We just want to make sure that we can continue to have this conversation going forward, given the state's over-reliance on property taxes to fund local services. Senator Bewley, your thoughts on the local sales tax?
Well, first of all, I think that it's a little unfortunate that counties are being compared to Walworth, and there's somehow some suggestion that people in other counties aren't going to do the smart thing like Walworth County did. I don't think that's true necessarily. But that's what a referendum is for, is to let the people decide. And I think they're all equally capable of making a good decision. You might not like it, but they're allowed to make their own decisions. Resources raining down from the feds. Ooh, I don't know where. There's a drought up here where I live in the 25th. And if I were to talk to my caucus members and the counties that they represent, I don't think those counties are going to find federal resources raining down. And that's what we're talking about here. We're talking about our counties. I think that it's also unfortunate that that the counties are hearing a blunt no. Nope, never, no how, especially in light of the fact that it sounds like the counties want to be creative. They want to negotiate, and I'm interested in hearing what they have to say. I must say that I hadn't heard that the counties were willing to suggest that some portion of a sales tax be devoted to tax relief. I'm open to that too. I think we have to be creative. What we can't do is just say no. That's not going to help. We have to say, let's try, let's look, let's talk, let's work. Because the people are trying very, very hard to get a discussion going. And to just be told no, I think is, we're not doing our jobs. We have to work harder than that. It's too easy to say no.
Representative Hinz?
Well, I mean, the reality is that we're in almost year 20 of declining flat, no policy shared revenue. And we've seen inflation go up, but with tight levy limits, we have seen, ultimately a reduction in services provided by cities and counties, more nickel and diming on fees that are out there. I concur with you, Kyle, that property taxes are too high. I do think a lot of counties may pursue, should this become law, the option of an increased sales tax for the purposes of lowering property taxes, dependent on their priorities. But for places like Milwaukee County, which are one of the biggest engines of our state, the reality is our ability to compete in the future is going to be based on the ability of our biggest communities to be able to invest in the kind of quality of life initiatives that make us a destination. We know that businesses are locating not just based on taxes, but they're in some ways, times they're going to places that even have a higher tax burden because of the type of quality and life investments that draw talent. And, we want, first and foremost, I always say to people running for local office, make sure the police are there to respond, make sure the streets are plowed and the garbage is picked up. But in too many times, we're seeing that out beyond the basic services and at the county level, state mandated services, the revenue isn't there to do a lot of the work beyond that. That would be investments in quality of life or investments in economic development. And if we're not going to hold up our end of the bargain at the state level related to any sort of shared revenue policy, and I think that ship has probably sailed given what the other priorities of the state are, then I do think we need to start looking at voter approved revenue options. And I do think the fact that we are significantly lower in sales tax and then still, I think, second highest in overall property tax burden is the easiest option available to us. And so I'd hope we would get past just the immediate no and have a real discussion about our ability to compete and maintain quality services going forward, given that that is a bigger driving factor for future economic development, for future talent recruitment, than simply saying, we're going to limit the size of government or spending, adhering to some sort of ideology versus where the public actually is right now. And so I'm glad it was included. It's a direct response to what local government advocates, city and county leaders have asked for. I know that we've had a Milwaukee proposal in the past, but I think expanding it around the state gives some creative options. In Winnebago County, we're still one of the few counties with that hasn't used the existing half-cent option, and that may remain, the priority. We have a well-run county, but I also know that every year is a challenge, given what the cost of inflation are and the ability of us to maintain the quality of services we like and the limitations to additional enhancements that would benefit our community. So I would really ask that my colleagues, reconsider, given that the public gets to choose in this case. It's not blindly creating it. And I think each community, there's a lot of communities in rural areas that are losing population that I think would like to have the resources available, perhaps to invest more, maybe even to move forward with some investments in broadband that might not be covered by the state grants. So I think we need to think about those things.
Senator Lemieux.
So, if you look at the entirety of the governor's budget and put this in context, giving the counties and municipalities the ability to raise 0.5%, it's almost required by what he put in the rest of his budget. Because if you're eliminating Act 10 and you're starting to put prevailing wage onto local projects, local costs are going to explode. Local governments are going to need a way to pay for employee benefits again, rising, uncontrollable employee costs. Act 10 saved $14 billion to the state of Wisconsin. And if that gets reversed, yeah, it's going to put a strain on local governments again, because they're going to have increased expenses. So in answer to your question, once we take policy like that out of the budget, I don't think there's any need for the local 0.5% sales tax option. To Speaker Voss's point, Sheboygan County, which I'm sure you're familiar with, Kyle, added the 0.5% about four years ago, and they did it to fund local roads, to increase spending. Whether that's right or wrong, that's their decision to make as a county, but it certainly wasn't used to reduce taxes, property taxes in Sheboygan County. And now they have an extra pot of money every year that they're using to refinish roads, rebuild roads, which is great for local roads. Manitowoc County, another county, as the minority leader hints, that's one of the few counties that actually hasn't added the 0.5% up in Manitowoc County. That's because they're having that debate. If we're going to add it, the county exec wants to use it for property tax relief, whereas the county board wants to spend it, at least the majority of the county board. So I think if there is a proposal to sort of shift taxes away from property taxes, we can always look at it, but to try couch this as a way to reduce property taxes, that seems very doubtful.
If I could just add one comment very quickly, I feel the responsibility to illustrate just how serious problems are for local units of government, because there seems to be this approach that perhaps they can and should be more creative and cut more. I have 4 towns in a county the one right next to me, Ashland County, that has no ambulance service. Now, this isn't because they're lazy. It isn't because they spend their money in a bad way. They have no provider that is willing to come in because it's too expensive, too far. They have no volunteers. We are on all volunteer. No paid ambulance service will come in. So if you call 911, you cross your fingers. Right now, they drive themselves to the hospital, to the emergency room. It's a mandated service and they can't do it. And they're heartsick and they're begging for help. So I think that the seriousness of the situation cannot just be dismissed and say, be creative, we're going to cut some more. I think that we have a responsibility to listen to what they're saying and do something about it.
Have they gone to referendum already and asked the voters to increase their own revenues?
They haven't had time yet, but they're thinking of it, yes.
Okay, they have that option now. That's good.
Pardon me?
They have that option now, right?
Yes, they do. And the
Okay.
voters will turn it down. And then they're going to be in the same position that they are right now.
So if the voters turn it down, doesn't that mean that they don't support what you're advocating for?
No, perhaps that means that they're not smart, you know? Sometimes we have to do things that allow them the ability, we as a state have to do things that are part of the state's responsibility that should not always be linked to one group. If they can't provide it, don't we have some collective responsibility to help those communities that depend on volunteer emergency services?
Janet, do you want to rethink that? I mean, I disagree with people a lot, but I don't think people who disagree with me are dumb. I mean, you just basically say your own constituents are dumb who disagree with you.
Well, the reference to Walworth County didn't go over real well with me, so.
Okay.
So shifting gears a little bit from the state budget, while the budget's on everybody's mind, we know that we're really just in the infancy of this legislative session. So moving forward and kind of outside the budget, what are the priorities for your respective caucuses outside of the budget, and what do you hope to get accomplished? Representative Hinz?
Yeah, well, I mean, our hope is to shape the budget's probably 75, 80% of what we do every session. And a lot of the Democrats' priorities are included in the governor's budget. And with our members on joint finance and our caucus are going to try to push and reach people around the state and encourage our colleagues to get behind those things that are core to what Democrats believe in terms of expanding opportunity for all people. You know, that being said, this is the redistricting session. So trying to get a commitment from my colleagues to move forward with a fair maps process that would avoid what we've had for the last decade. And if we can't get that passed in statute, certainly encouraging the process that will begin later this fall, you know, is something that we're going to do given the broad support that we've seen from folks around the state. I do think there are some other areas that we are, you know, interested in. And I think a lot of the policies that are included in Governor Evers' budget, which probably won't be surprising when they're removed, will be introduced in standalone legislation, including areas like marijuana reform, you know, better workers' rights to be able to have a seat at the table as someone who represents employees in the largest correctional facility in the state. Having a seat at the table, having a say, directly contributes to our ability to maintain an adequate workforce. And so some of the things that have been started in Governor Evers' budget are going to be the kind of things that will continue, that this is the starting point. I am hopeful. I mean, our caucus is very adamant about getting a lot of changes in addressing systemic racism in our state. Wisconsin's been dead last for decades now, quite frankly, in too many measurable things, whether it's the number of Black people incarcerated versus the population, the worst outcomes, the highest concentration of unemployment among demographic, infant mortality outcomes. And of course, we're seeing it play out in terms of the impact of the pandemic, both in terms of lives lost, but also in terms of vaccinations. We are also aware of disproportionate use of force in too many cases, differential treatment for people of color by law enforcement. And I think there have been a number of discussions, including proposals made by law enforcement at the table, knowing that we need to move forward. I don't believe that government can solve all of these problems, but I do think being aware of how our existing laws and practices impact the people of our state is something that we need to re-examine and certainly assess with every measure that we make. So whether the task force can hopefully recommend some things that are the beginning of that, I do think we need to act also to send a signal that we're serious, especially as our state tries to be welcome diversity, welcome recruitment, welcome involvement. But I think it's also just trying to, other things for Democrats are trying to have a long-term vision for the state that recognizes economic opportunity, throughout the state and the importance of quality of life investments. I think Democrats were able to move some of my colleagues, and I hope we see renewed commitment on the issues of groundwater. I don't think it's received as much attention at the beginning of this session, perhaps as last session, but it remains a major issue as we kind of find the right balance between agriculture in our communities and the importance of clean drinking water going forward. I will say personally, one of my big issue areas has been public health. I think if there's a story of the last 2 years, it's that we've underinvested in public health, and we've also underinvested in election administration, which would be the top thing we could do if we were going to safeguard the integrity of our election system. And I'd like us to continue to support counties, especially. We were able to get a limited increase in the budget that I helped work on in 2017. But I think as we go forward, I don't know that the COVID-19 pandemic is going to be the last rodeo that we have, unfortunately, with growing viral threats around the country. And so I think there are things coming out of the COVID experience that we're going to need to react and be investing in going forward to maintain quality of life.
Mr. Speaker?
So my goal to be able to move legislation in tandem with the budget, so things that we could try to do in the first spring session. We have, approximately 100 bills that passed the assembly, but because of COVID did not have a chance to get to the state Senate. I think there's a lot of good ideas in there. I saw that the Senate took up the PBM reform bill. They're kind of moving that along. We did that last session, so I think that's a good thing that we can get into law. I think that we do have our Speaker's Task Force on racial disparities. Our hope is to have some bills ready for the April or May floor periods as we move forward with that. We had our Speaker's Task Forces on water quality. Many of those ideas got through the Assembly. Again, didn't make it through the state Senate, but hopefully we can reintroduce some of those and work on that. So I think there's a lot of issues that are working their way through the process, but the one that we're probably going to spend a lot of time on, and Gordon kind of referenced it broadly, and that's what we're going to do about elections to build integrity back into the system. We have millions of people in the state who feel the election was not administered fairly and that the results are in question. Now, I know Joe Biden is the president, and that is not going to change, but I certainly also know that the process we went through is not one that people believe was done fairly. There's a huge amount of Wisconsinites that have deep doubts about what's happening. So we need to address that. Now, I know my Democratic colleagues are going to say that's just the boogeyman and we're not going to do anything and that the system is great just like it is. I don't agree with that. And I think we want to spend some time demonstrating the things that we can do which will make the system better. The goal is to not advantage one side or the other. The goal is to make sure that at the end, when the election is held and whoever wins, both sides walk away saying that was done fair and square. And that did not happen in this last election cycle, so that's got to change. So I have a feeling we're going to spend a large amount of time between now and June, making sure that we have a better election system so that whoever wins in 2022, people do not begin the week after the election doubting the integrity of the person who won, as opposed to fighting harder the next time to help their candidate be victorious. So I think that's going to be a huge thing. I know that's something we're going to work with counties on. I'm organizing a meeting with my local municipal clerks and county clerk to try to get a better understanding of where they see input. frankly, I've gotten a lot of clerks who've come to me saying they see problems with the election cycle too. So it's not a partisan issue. It shouldn't be. My hope is we can have some of those things work their way through that don't just have people go into the red or blue corner and then nothing really changes.
Senator Bewley?
I think that the caucus wants to see the state treated fair and balanced so that there's no winners and losers. I believe that we have too many indicators of people who win, and look at MANAG, having it been in effect. It is obvious, it's extremely clear that only the top wage earners, the top income, really receive the majority of the benefits of that. That we have parts of the state that do well and parts of the state that don't, for reasons that are not in their control. Areas with a high percentage of public land, for example, are not made whole. They have to rely upon PILTs or some other payment that is artificially inserted, and it doesn't make up for the lack of an economic base. We have to make sure that justice is the norm, that we put things in place that are going to protect those who are typically denied their rights and help the system to more easily recognize when injustice takes place and make sure that it's corrected and doesn't happen again. Right now, we know that our corrections system, our sentencing system, there are so many things that unfairly affect people of color. Statistically, it's just there. And we really have to look hard at ourselves and the fact that there are changes we can make. There are things that we can learn, and we must do them. And I think that overall, we need to be creative, and we need to be tolerant. We need to be able to get along. And I think that we're in a place right now where we can build upon some of the successes that we have in dealing with each other across party lines. I'm truly confident, particularly in the Senate, that we are going to be able to work together, and that we have already and we will continue to kind of lower the temperature so that we can avoid the kind of animosity that has dominated our exchanges, because I truly believe that we really do want to work together.
And Senator Lemieux.
Yeah, I think the speaker highlighted a lot of sort of what the priorities of what the Senate Republican caucus will be looking at. As he mentioned, our goal early on in this session has been trying to make sure the state can respond nimbly to COVID, but also starting to work on bills that didn't get across the finish line last year in the Senate. A lot of great bipartisan bills just because COVID hit and we didn't get them done. He referenced the PBM bill. There are many other bills like that that are out there, which we've been focusing on early in the session to try get done before we get heavy into the budget season. Obviously, since we spent most of this call talking about the budget, that's the most important thing we do, and we're going to obviously be focused on, passing a budget that doesn't increase taxes and is responsible while still investing in core priorities, like we've done the last 10 years. And I think obviously election integrity reform is going to be, I won't dwell on this too long since the speaker did a good job of describing that, but we are a purple state. Our statewide elections are going to be pretty close, and we need to do everything we can to ensure that whether a Democrat or Republican wins, that our constituents around the state have confidence in our election results. Our first priority is to have fair elections that don't have fraud. And the number 2 priority should be to build that confidence in our electorate, because if we have an election and people don't believe the results or question the results, it's not healthy for democracy, frankly. And finally, I think a focus of our caucus will be for the small Main Street business, the employer who sort of got kicked in the gut in 2020. Some of them were forced to shut down for a couple months. But even those that weren't forced to shut down just because of the pandemic, it's been a real struggle. We've already sort of addressed that in two areas. First of all, not taxing the PPP loans, which was very important for small businesses. And just yesterday in the assembly, the liability protections to make sure that these not just small businesses, but churches, nonprofits, schools, areas like that, to make sure if when they're opening, trying to return back to normal, that they don't face frivolous lawsuits. But going forward, we need to make sure we're doing all we can for these Main Street businesses, employers. They're the backbone of our economy, to make sure that they stay around despite pandemics and things like that. So, but that's sort of the 30,000 foot level of what our focus will be.
All right, well, we have about 2 minutes remaining, so I just want to give each of you an opportunity just to make any closing remarks or advice you have for members of county government. We'll just go in the order that you appear on my screen. Representative Hintz, go ahead.
30 seconds or so. Well, thanks, Kyle. Thanks for WCA. I think all of us appreciate the opportunity to engage with you and have this kind of dialogue, especially at the beginning when everything is still possible. I want to encourage you to stay active, to reach out. Winnebago County has been great at having a regular monthly legislative committee affairs meeting with all of our area legislators invited. We also receive obviously a number of resolutions supporting or opposing state issues. Those things matter, and we ask you to ask questions, to weigh in, to get behind proposals, especially that are included in the state budget and that are important to counties like Winnebago County. And so, democracy is not a spectator sport. We often ask people to get involved during the elections, but sometimes it tapers off when we're making the actual decisions. And with local media declining a little bit, we need all the engagement possible. So thank you for all you do. I view the counties as real partners, especially during this pandemic, and look forward to your input.
Senator Bewley.
First of all, I want to say thank you for allowing us this forum. I appreciate it very much, and I always look forward to it. And I trust that next time we're going to do it in person. My advice to you is to do what you've been doing all along, which is you never give up. I think of your tenacity with Just Fix It. It was one of the most well-organized and effective campaigns that I've seen out of organizations. And so I want to congratulate you on that and to tell you, do what you do. Continue to engage us. We love to participate in your whatever form you would create. I was just with the Burnett County Board a couple nights ago. Having us hear you in your setting is very, very valuable. So you come to us. I think that we are all willing to come to you and hope that we'll continue these conversations in the upcoming year.
Senator Lemieux.
Yeah, thank you, Kyle, and hopefully you have great viewership for this hour, 15-minute or however long we've been on this call program. As a former county board supervisor, I know everybody watching, I know you're probably all well underpaid, or most of you are underpaid for the amount of effort that you put into your thankless job. So just thank you for your service to the community at the local level. Those in my area, feel free to reach out to me whenever you have any concerns. And association, I'll give some kudos to Kyle and his association, do a great job of communicating with us. So thank you.
Thank you. And last but not least, Speaker Voss.
Yeah, thank you too. I want to also give a shout out to WCA. You guys do an excellent job, and I appreciate you organizing this and continuing to advocate for counties when the vast majority of good people who are involved in the counties have other jobs that depend on you to represent them at the Capitol. So congratulations on that. The only piece of advice I would have is that this budget is going to be more challenging, only from the standpoint that there will be less opportunity for people to have input, only because of COVID. We are going to try to be as normal as we can. So reaching out, trying to meet with your legislators in person, trying to have those conversations is going to be more important than ever because it's just harder to be connected with people with COVID. So my hope would be that people double down and try to be as engaged as they possibly can be. I think we're going to have a very robust discussion. There's a lot of things that the counties have talked to us about. I want to give a shout out to my local officials too. Jonathan Delgrave and our county board do a fantastic job. I feel like sometimes they are my most frequent commenter because they have got so many issues that the county is dealing with, and they do an excellent job of it. So look forward to working with all of you. Thanks to my colleagues for being on the call, and hopefully we will have a great legislative session.
All right. Well, again, on behalf of the Wisconsin Counties Association and all of really county government, want to thank you for joining us today. We recognize that we have a lot of asks and we may not always agree on everything, but the openness that your offices provide to me and our legislative team is incredibly appreciated. So thank you for what you do. We look forward to working with you, and thanks for taking a little over an hour today to spend with us and our members.
Since 1997, every county in our state has benefited from the programs, products, and services offered through both WCA services and the Wisconsin Counties Association. The success of WCA services is due in part to our insistence on the highest of corporate standards from well-respected companies. These vendors provide counties and other public entities with meaningful solutions that help them best serve their employees and their citizens. All programs offered through both WCA services and the Wisconsin Counties Association are relevant, timely, and secure for any public entity's use. This trust is at the foundation of all we do. Learn more at wcasey.com.
Welcome, ladies and gentlemen, and I am here with my good friend number one,
right.
Governor,
Right.
Secretary,
Right.
President,
Right.
the person I worked for 35 years ago when I came to work for you.
That is correct.
And probably best of all, county board member,
County board
Thompson.
member. Don't forget the county board member. I look back and I learned county politics in the Allen Thompson grocery store. My father, who was on the county board over 30-some years, and he was the head of the Road and Bridge Committee over 18 of those 30-some years. And every Friday night, the local farmers that come into the Thompson grocery store would have raw hamburgers and crackers and cheese and beer and talk about roads and building and bridges and all this. I became fascinated with how decisions are made at the local level. I became fascinated with politics, and that's how I think I started in politics. At 7 years old, I was there. Wasn't drinking beer, but I was eating the raw hamburger. And I love the county boards because they're the epic center of local politics. And all the people out there, you're very fortunate to be on the county. You've got a great president in the Counties Association, my good friend Mark. And all of you just should be very happy with what you're doing.
So that would have been probably in the 1950s when you were around that Cracker Barrel.
True.
I mean, let's go through this. You were a legislator. You were the governor of the state of Wisconsin. You were
20 years as a legislator. Nobody thought I could win at 23. Governor at 43.
Mm-hmm. Secretary in George Bush's administration.
And nobody thought I could win governorship either.
Well, that's true.
Everybody you can't do it.
And then when you won governor in 1986, that's when I came to work for you.
Yeah.
And then secretary of a cabinet at the federal level with George Bush.
That's true.
Not only secretary of a cabinet, but you were the focal point, the guy in the darkest hour this country's ever seen, 9/11.
I still remember that. I was going to work at 8:30 in the morning. I had invited in, I had given a speech in the morning for breakfast, and at 8:30 I was going to the office, and I invited in the scientists from all over the country to see if we could work on one flu vaccine, ubiquitous, for all the variants of flu. And they were coming in, and then I hear that the first crash, and I said, get to the office, and then the second, and the third, and the fourth, and the rest is history. And everybody else was left, and I had to get 100 tons of medical supplies up to New York by 5 o'clock. And it was absolutely amazing that we were able to do it. I think I'm the only one outside of the Air Force that got a plane in the air that day, because if you remember, all airplanes were grounded. We got the airplane from CDC to deliver the medical supplies to New York. So it was an exciting, sad situation, but I've had a tremendous history and a tremendous opportunity, thanks to people like you that have always been there supporting me, and I thank you and I thank the counties.
Well, I remember you showed me the war room in the basement.
They named it after me now.
I did not know that.
Yeah, they did. And
Wow,
and
congratulations.
well, thank you. Finally, Mark is talking about a war room that's in the Department of Health and Human Services. After 9/11, I built a war room so that I could go right across from my office, right across the corridor. You know how close it was. Yeah. And I could see every country in the world, every city in the country. And I had a big picture of Elroy as the center of the universe. Remember that?
I do.
Everybody laughed and come in. What is Elroy? And I said, that's the center of the universe. You never forget your roots.
That's true. Well, that's true. And you've never forgotten you were part of county government. It's always been a part of you. So legislator, governor, secretary, you have earned the right to kick back and relax a bit. And yet, when the university came calling, you said yes again to serve the state of Wisconsin as president of the University of Wisconsin system. Why?
Why not? Who gets an opportunity at 79 years of age to do another change in your life and be able to run something as big and as important as the University of Wisconsin? They came to me. I turned them down the first time, a couple times, and then they came back again, and I said, all right, if I could run the university without restrictions in regards to being able to make changes. They said, go ahead. And so I'm making all kinds of changes. I don't know how long I'm going to be here, but for as long as I'm here, I'm making changes for the betterment of the students, the faculty, and the state of Wisconsin. I love this state, as you know, like you do. You love the Counties Association. I love Wisconsin and its people. And next to its people, I think the University of Wisconsin is the next best asset. And I want to build the university so that it can be the best in the world. And we have 170,000 students, we have 40,000 employees, and a $6 billion operation. We send back $30 billion totally every year to the state of Wisconsin. We are a global economic engine, and I want to make sure we build that economic engine for the future, for the betterment of the state.
You may be 79, but you have always had the energy of a 29-year-old, and it's still there.
Well, there's no question about it. I've been blessed. I mean, the good Lord has been good to me. I mean, I haven't got the COVID yet, and I'm still going. I'm in my office every single day like you are. Not many people go to their office anymore. Everybody's staying home, working home. I'm here at the University of Wisconsin. People are shocked that I'm here. Come on in.
And every once in a while, I guess we're getting people in on a little secret. I get a text from you. I text you back. You're always working, night, weekend, holiday. In any event.
But so are you, Mark.
Well, that's true.
That's the way we grew up.
Well, hard work.
And that's the way. I bet over half your county board members are the same way. They grew up with us. And, we had to work for everything. Nothing was given to us.
Yep.
And I guess that's good.
It's the work ethic of our state, and we're known for
learn how to work.
We're known for that all across the country, everywhere you go.
Everybody.
Wisconsin.
When Kikkoman came in from Japan to Walworth County, the thing that surprised him so much is the work ethic of the Wisconsin employee. Yeah. And they had a big snowstorm. The farmers down in Walworth County showed up for work.
Yeah.
They couldn't believe it. And so that makes Wisconsin unique, makes us different. And that's why, I'm so proud to be with you today and talk to you, because I love county government. I love the people that are in county government, because they're just like you and me. They're hardworking, dedicated to their counties, dedicated to their communities, and dedicated to their families. What can be better?
What more can be said? Holy cow, Governor! And for those listening, and I asked you this years ago, what should I call you? President, secretary? And you said governor. You can call me anything you want, but call me governor if you're looking for something to call me. So
I said call me Tommy.
That's true.
I said call me Tommy, but if you want a formal title, call me governor, because I thought that was the pinnacle of success, pinnacle of opportunity, and you can do so much being governor. I used to love going to the counties association and getting up and talking about what we were going to do on roads or whatever the case may be, environment, whatever. The counties are always there. They're local people. It can be Republican, Democrats, Independents, Catholics, Baptists, Communists. Well, I don't care. Not Communists, but but the truth of the matter is they're good, hard-working people, which I love.
So in the higher education arena, we've got four-year universities,
Right.
we've got two-year colleges, we've got tech colleges, we got a lot of doors being open and some talked about being closed. And there's some controversy and questions with some of these categories. But what do you see as the future of higher education?
I see a great future, but it's got to change. Mark, truth of the matter is we got a declining enrollment of students in high school in Wisconsin. So you got fewer students that are going to go on to either vocational school or on to the University of Wisconsin. That's number one. Number two, we have 815,000 residents in Wisconsin, Mark, that have started either vocational school or the university and never finished. And we got to find those individuals, see if we can bring them back. Third, college is extremely expensive. And we got to make sure it's accessible and affordable to all the people that want it. And number four, we got to make sure that people know that they can go to college. They can go while they're working, they can go in the evening, they can go in the morning, or they can come and be a full-time resident on the campus. You got to be all things to so many people, and that's what future education is about. And we have to make sure that we have to build for the future. And that means maybe there are too many buildings out there. Maybe we have to start consolidating some of the things. You know, we can only afford so much higher education. The taxpayers can only spend so much money and have so much money to go to education. And we have to make sure we guard that jealously. And we cannot allow duplications. And that, you got to look at all campuses and find out how you can make sure that they can prioritize for the future and be the best for the future for the students and for the economic welfare of the state.
We've got, as almost everyone would agree, one of the greatest systems of
Absolutely.
education on the planet.
Right,
Higher education
there's no
systems.
question. 170,000 students. Can you believe that in little Wisconsin?
If we could find a person that did not know about the University of Wisconsin system, how would you describe the system to that person? What would you say to them?
You can come to the University of Wisconsin system and be anything you want, number one. We are accessible, we're affordable, we have a plethora of courses that can turn you into anything you want, from an engineer to a lawyer, to a teacher, to a nurse, to a doctor, to a computer scientist. We're building all the time for the future. And I tell everybody, as I've told everybody, Wisconsin has got this diamond, this university. And what we've always been known for is the Wisconsin idea, serving all corners of the state. But now I want to expand that idea, Mark, into let the University of Wisconsin be the problem solver for Wisconsin. The counties have a problem, come to the university. Let's work together and solve a problem. We got huge resources. We got great faculty, and we got these great buildings and research centers. Let's start using the university for the betterment of all of Wisconsin and start solving the problems in the state. That's what I want the future of the university, and I want everybody to recognize the University of Wisconsin is a problem solver, and we want your sons and daughters, we want you and your spouse and your grandparents to come and have a course. We want people to use the university for themselves, for their families, and to be able to recognize that we're there for you. Not for us, for you. And that's what the University of Wisconsin, the new University of Wisconsin is going to be. We're not here for us, we're here for you. The counties association, the families, the farmers, the small business person, to come and use us for whatever problem you have, for whatever course you need. We'll give you if it's a distance course, distance learning, if you want to come and monitor a course, fine. Come and use the University of Wisconsin. I want to open the doors. I don't want anybody to have any concerns, any mystique about the university. We are open and accessible.
This is going to take some really big ideas and incredible leadership to get to that point,
Yeah.
I think. It reminds me of your days as governor, and I recall this fondly. When you would call us all in on any particular topic, and I was the mediation, arbitration, retirement guy, and you would ask us, the issue would be on the table, and you would ask every person, what do you think? What do you think? And you gave us all an opportunity to share our views.
Right.
And we didn't know where you were on the issue.
That's right.
You took it all in, and you were intently listening. We could tell. And when we left that room, you didn't tell us what the decision was yet because you had to think about it. It reminds me of that. You have to take a lot of information in. If we're going to get to that point, you've got a great team here at the University of Wisconsin system.
I got a fantastic team, and they're following me. They like the fact that I'm involved in so much. You know me, I can't leave, anything alone.
That's true.
I hate you know it is. I hate the status quo. Status quo means you're accepting what it is. I never will accept the status quo. I'm always saying, how can I make it better? How can I change it? There's got to be a way to do this better. And that's Tommy Thompson. That's my life. That's what I love. And this university gives me the greatest opportunity to build upon what was the status quo to make it better. And I'm changing a lot of things. So many things, a lot of people are scratching their heads that they put me here, but so far they've been very supportive, and I'm going to keep doing it till I get out. Till the day I walk out here, I'll have an idea. Look at the board over there. If you want, there's over 50 items up there that I'm making changes on.
I saw it's a board full of big ideas and medium-sized ideas and all kinds of things.
Yeah.
If they're on a rare day that you actually have off, if there is such a thing, and I guess I'm going to fold this into the other question, two parts of it. On a rare day that you don't have something on your agenda, what is it that you would like to do? And I guess secondly, I'm going to partly answer it. Why is the farm in Elroy so close to you? And I've been there, and I love it out there. You and I played cards out there, and we had steaks out there.
And you took my money. You took my money, and you didn't even say thank you. You just beat me like a drum.
So what do you like to do on a day off? And then tell us why the farm is so close to you.
I love going to the farm. Nothing's better than cutting a field of hay and cutting 25 acres of hay and looking back and say, Tommy, you did that. Get on a tractor and be able to do that. To rake a field of hay or bale a field of hay and pick it up, not like you had to pick it up. Now we got big machines to do that. So, and those bales weigh 1,000 pounds. But, it's the fact that you're back home. This was my mother was born on that farm. The farm was in the Irish Dutton family, and my great-grandfather was the first white settler on that road between Elroy and Kendall. It's something about it. It's about the heritage. It's about the environment. It's about the future. It's about seeing things grow. It's about developing something from scratch and making it happen. To be able to plant a seed and then harvest it, 6 or 7 months later, what? That's life.
Yeah.
That's Wisconsin. And so, I really love being on the farm.
Okay, well, speaking of the farm and building things and growing them and building them from scratch.
I think I know where you're going. I'm not sure I like it.
Well, and some folks have heard it, but not everyone. You got to tell us a story when you built the place you have on the farm. And I know you call it, a shed and a little shack. It's a lot more than that. But not everyone was fully informed about what you were doing there.
Well, I knew my wife did not want me to build a house on the farm. She was adamantly opposed to it. And I figured if I went and told her I was going to do it, I was coming out of Washington. I just finished being the secretary, and I was making money for the first time in my life. I was doing a lot of speaking and making money from speaking. And I said, if I just take it, if I just take the money and I'll just use it. I'll spend it. Or my wife will, or my children, whatever, which is fine. But I thought, why don't you take some of that money that you're making and build a house on the farm? And I thought I could build a house on the farm without telling my wife.
That's a pretty big secret.
Why I ever thought that? I thought I could actually do it. And I didn't realize, that Sue Ann grew up in the neighboring city and he got a lot of friends. And they called him and said, did you know that Tommy's thinking about building a house? No, he is not. He knows I'm opposed to it. And so I got a few more bucks, and I never mortgaged it. If I got made money, then I'd hire some people to build another part of the building, part of the house. And the first thing was when I got $30,000 ahead, I wanted to put in the basement and the water and the sewer system, septic system. And the first thing was the engineer came up and the backhoe, and one of the women from Elroy saw him up there, and she stopped at the house and said, "What are you doing?" She said, "Well, we're digging the basement for Tommy's house." She couldn't get off the hill fast enough to call Sue Ann, my wife. Do you know Tommy's building a basement? He is not. So for the next 6 weeks, I knew my wife knew that I knew my wife knew that I was building a house. We weren't talking. I thought we're headed for a divorce here, and it was close, but but anyway, it turned out okay. She found out about it, and she was mad for a while. Then she warmed up to it, and now she loves it like I do. So, but it was tense at the moment.
Governor, you raised some cattle on that farm too.
Belted Galloways.
Special breed of cattle.
Belted Galloways, they're the Oriole cookie cow. They're black in the front and black in the back, got a white belt around them. And I have over 100 head. You should buy one. I mean, they're great beef, and they're lean. Good for your heart.
I actually think I'm on the list to buy one of
Well, it's great. And we got, I just found out from the veterinarian, we got 45 pregnant cows going into the spring. But it's cold up there right now, but they're doing well.
It's almost as if you have no private life. I mean, you've been giving and giving and giving forever. Yeah. And you're always in the spotlight, and you're always making decisions, and you're always steering this state or some aspect of it towards something better. You don't learn that. Where did it come from?
Mark, I love people. I guess I've always done that. I love to be around people. I'd rather be with people than sitting alone. And so a lot of people like to go fishing. I like to fish. Like some people like to play golf. I'm not a very good golfer, but it's all right. But the truth of the matter is, I'd much rather be solving a problem with a group of people. I'd love to have a county board member saying, how do we do it? Can we figure out a way, or start a business? I always want to be moving and doing something. I can't sit still. I don't know. It's not in my genes to sit still. I've got to always have a project, one or two. It's usually half a dozen going. But that's me. It's what I do and what I love doing.
I have a very unfair question to ask you.
Go ahead.
And might be difficult for you because I've known you 35 years, and you're one to brag about our state, but not you. So here's the unfair question: what do you desire your legacy to be in Wisconsin?
I would like people to say he cared, and he always wanted to make Wisconsin better, and I do. I want Elroy, to be the center of the universe. I want my farm, to do well. I want the people to do well. I want this university, to be the diamond that it is, and everybody recognizes it. I want the state of Wisconsin. I love bragging about the state. I want people to recognize, we're very fortunate to live in this great state. And I think all your people out there are listening to this, if they are listening, if they haven't gone to sleep by now, you should be thankful that you're on the county board. You can do something. And that's what life's all about. Being able to do something for other people and for your community, and in this case, for the counties. I love that. That's me, is to be able to do something for people.
We have been talking with Tommy G. Thompson, legislator, governor, secretary in George W. Bush's cabinet, president of the University of Wisconsin system, and I guess, from my own personal view, my very, very good and dear friend.
I love you.
And Governor.
I love your wife better, though. You people don't know that his wife was, you met her, You met your wife in my office.
That's true. That is true. Yes. My wife was the insurance commissioner for Governor Thompson
Absolutely.
for several years.
The best insurance commissioner ever. Tell her that.
And Tommy Thompson, one of the greatest leaders this state has ever and will ever seen. Governor, thank you so much for spending time with us today, and county government certainly appreciates your dedication and vision and energy for this state.
Well, thank you, and thank you for all you do, Mark, and all the county board members. Thank you.
Life takes energy. Energy to create the world we call home and fuel our quality of life. Energy to make life more comfortable and to help people live their lives to the fullest. We dedicate ourselves to connecting people with the energy we all need, now and as energy changes. We deliver our customers' energy from the earth and harness the power of the sun and the wind. We do it all with integrity, a deep commitment to safety, and the utmost respect for communities and the environment. We are Enbridge, thousands of people working together to fuel people's quality of life through energy. Energy that moves our economy and daily life forward. Energy that makes life better, more convenient, and more connected. At Enbridge, we're committed to fueling life, because life takes energy.
Good morning and welcome to the 2021 WCA Virtual Legislative Exchange. This year is obviously much different than years prior. Typically, I'd be before you on the stage talking about the latest and greatest happenings in the legal world, but now I get to talk to you about it virtually. And as an added bonus, I'm providing this update a couple of weeks before the actual legislative exchange. And so I'm sure there are things that will be happening in the next 2 weeks that would otherwise impact what it is that we're about to talk about. But nonetheless, I thought it'd be a good idea to run through some of the things that we've learned in the past year. It's been quite the year. So what's changed as it relates to county government in a legal standpoint in the last 12 months? And while there's a lot that's changed, I've really narrowed it down to really 3 basic things that I want to talk to you about that I think have dominated much of my time and unfortunately much of your time over the course of the past 12 months. First, we learned that the business of county government has to go on. Counties did not stop operating. Counties did not stop governing. Counties did not stop providing critical services to the citizens that we all serve on a daily basis during this pandemic. And so we had to provide for continuity of governance. When we talk about continuity of governance, it's hard to get together in the midst of a pandemic because we were told that we had to socially distance. We were told that we couldn't engage in large gatherings. And basically we could not meet in the manner that we were accustomed to meeting in from about mid-March, and that continued for quite some time. So what did we do? Well, as counties, we adjusted, we changed, and we did what we do best, which is adapt to provide, again, those critical services. So we had our meetings in a virtual environment. County boards met online in a format similar to how the legislative exchange is occurring. We had committee meetings that occurred online. And when they weren't fully online, we had participants in the meeting engaged in online dialogue, online participation in these meetings. And then of course, as it relates to these meetings, as it relates to the change in the medium and the platform and the environment, we had all sorts of legal questions that arose as a result. How do we comply with the open meetings law in meeting in a virtual environment? Do we have to provide the public with opportunity to participate in a meeting? How do we run a public comment process through a virtual meeting? Can we conduct a hearing, whether it be zoning or a personnel situation? Can we conduct that through a virtual format? Unfortunately, Chapter 19 of our statutes, which contains the open meetings law, neither that chapter nor the Attorney General opinions give us a lot of guidance as it relates to this new virtual environment. I will note that it's through no fault of the Attorney General. The Attorney General has to interpret the laws that are provided to us. And unfortunately, there's just not anything in statute that addresses these issues. And so we had to make the best with what we had. And so we took a look at the statutes. We took a look at guidance from the Attorney General, and we made do with what we had. So as we think about, as we move forward out of this pandemic, hopefully very, very soon, is it time for our county boards, for our county leaders to start thinking about our board rules as it relates to meeting procedures? Are virtual meetings here to stay? Are these hybrid meetings, partially in person, partially virtual? Are they here to stay? Are we going to allow members of committees or members of the county board to appear at our meetings in a virtual environment? All of these things relate back to the particular rules that govern your governance as a county official. So if your board rules do not address these issues, that can be a problem. And so as we think about the questions, as we think about what the future may look like, let's also dust off those county board rules and figure out how it is we structure ourselves in a way that is best going to address our governance model going forward. Second topic I'd like to talk about is the role of local health officers and health departments. I start with this bullet point. Did anybody see this coming? And for anybody who predicted this, I would like to take that person to Las Vegas because I think we could make a lot of money. I don't think anybody predicted that the pandemic would have such a vast impact on county government. And a lot of that is driven by what happened at the state level when the Supreme Court issued its decision in the legislature v. Palm in May of 2020. We saw all of the responsibilities shift to counties as it relates to the role of local health departments and local health officers. We were more or less forced into a position of coordinating both the education effort as it related to advising the public as to best practices surrounding COVID-19 and the pandemic, but then we were also thrust into the role of regulator and enforcer. As you might recall, back in May of 2020, when the Supreme Court issued its decision, it took away enforcement authority on the state health orders from the state DHS secretary. Well, does that mean that the local health officer has enforcement authority? What do the statutes say about that? And we learned that the statutes weren't entirely clear as it relates to a local health officer's enforcement authority. And so we were founded as local health officers and local health departments on Chapter 252 of the statutes. But again, the statutes didn't give us the answers to all of the questions that we were confronted with and thinking about over the course of the past 10, 11 months. And so as we talk about what we ought to be doing, as again, we hopefully soon move out of this pandemic, should we be thinking about our local health ordinances? Do they adequately address all of the different roles and responsibilities that we are asking our health officer, our health department, our local board of health? Are we addressing all of those things in ordinance like we should? I think it's important for counties to consider this role, and I don't think every county is going to be the same. We saw a variety of reactions to the pandemic at the local level throughout Wisconsin, and I don't think the variety of reactions to any sort of health issue is going to be the same in each and every county. And so it will be customized. We have the ability as counties to customize. We have the ability as counties to have different ordinances. Again, all of those ordinances have to be founded on solid legal authority found in Chapter 252 of the statutes and the administrative code, but you can have differences and that's okay. But I think all of us, all 72 counties, need to start thinking about the role of the local health officer, the role of the department, the local health department, and the role of the Board of Health. And then also think about the enforceability question. How are we going to provide teeth to the extent we want teeth as it relates to enforcement of these orders or directives or provisions or other measures that come out of the work of our local health department, our local health officer, and our local Board of Health? Third topic I want to talk about, emergencies don't wait for politics. We saw politics in full force at the federal level and the state level over the course of the last 10 months. The state's response to the pandemic was a bit underwhelming. We saw vast periods of inaction from the legislature. I think the last time they got together in 2020 was in April, and then they did not reconvene until January of this year. And so with that absence of a state legislative effort, we had a bit of a gridlock at the state level. Did the health officer, this DHS secretary, did she have authority to do what she was doing? Did the governor have authority? Those are all questions that were litigated. They were litigated in circuit court. They made their way all the way up to the Supreme Court. As of me recording this particular presentation, we're still waiting for Supreme Court decisions. We may have those decisions by the time that this recording finally airs, but we're still waiting for the Supreme Court for additional guidance. Well, you know what we didn't have as counties is the luxury of waiting. We couldn't just wait and see what happened at the state level. We couldn't wait to see what the Supreme Court came out with. We had to act, and we had to preserve the best interests of the citizens that we serve. And so that led to the question of what is the county's authority to act in the absence of any sort of specific directive from the state. That leads us to not only analysis of Chapter 252 of the statutes, which I talked about earlier, but Chapter 323 of the statutes as it relates to a county's emergency powers. And much like with 252 of the statutes, 323 has some good language, but it is not exactly perfectly prescriptive, I guess is the phrase, in terms of defining exactly what authority a county has, what powers a county has, how a county is supposed to act in certain situations, who's making what decisions, when, impacting whom. Those are all questions that are left a little bit to the imagination of the county officials who are charged with the responsibility of acting under Chapter 323 of the statutes. So here's the third takeaway. Is now the time to start thinking about our emergency and emergency preparedness ordinances? It absolutely is. And I think counties would be well served to start having discussions at the board level with other county leadership, with executives, with administrators, with administrative coordinators, with the coordinators and the directors of your emergency departments. Start talking about chain of command, start talking about who has the authority to declare a state of emergency and what that really means. Those are a lot of questions that I received, and I know other corporation counsel around the state received when this pandemic first hit. Well, who has the power to declare a state of emergency within the county? And if so, what does that trigger? What is the downside to declaring a state of emergency? What is the upside? And an ordinance can help define not only the chain of command about who makes what decisions, but also the impact of those decisions. Does that mean certain departments or organizations or entities within the county are mobilized, so to speak, and are in a position to be able to take action without official action from the county board? Those are all, again, questions that can be answered through that ordinance, that emergency or emergency preparedness ordinance. I think the one thing that we learned as it relates to this pandemic is that no matter how much you try to think about what may happen, you can't predict exactly what is going to happen in a state of emergency. Circumstances change almost on a daily basis. And as long as we have a solid foundation in place, and this is what I'm talking about with taking a look at your governance structure and your board rules, taking a look at your health department and your health ordinance under Chapter 252, talking about this idea of taking a look at emergency and emergency preparedness ordinances under Chapter 323. What I'm talking about is a governance foundation so that no matter the circumstances that arise, we have a solid platform and foundation that is going to guide that decision-making process. And if we answer the question of who's making what decision, when, impacting whom, that is going to go a long way toward making the county ready for whatever may confront us in the future. So one thing I guarantee is that this pandemic is not going to be the last emergency to confront county government in Wisconsin. We're going to have another state of emergency declared at some point. Counties are going to be faced with one crisis or another down the road. All we can do is be prepared from a procedural standpoint to deal with that crisis. We can't predict the crisis itself. So I want to take a brief moment and thank you for the opportunity to be of service for the last year. It has been quite the interesting year. I've had a lot of Zoom calls. I've done a lot of video conferencing. It's been a pleasure to speak with everybody, see everybody on video conferences. I, for one, though, cannot wait till we can get back together in person. I think that the events that we have, whether it be the legislative exchange or the annual conference, are such a great opportunity to network, share ideas, share laughs, enjoy what it is that we've accomplished, look toward the future about what it is that we can accomplish. I really miss those events, and I think everybody does miss those events. But again, thank you very much for the opportunity to be of service for the last year. It has been a wonderful and interesting ride for the last 10 to 12 months. So with that, I think at this point, we get the opportunity to turn it over to you for questions that you may have. And I'm happy to take any and all questions, whether it's related to the topics I just discussed or otherwise. Thank you.
Ladies and gentlemen, you've been watching a pre-recorded presentation by WCA General Counsel Andy Phillips of Von Briesen and Roper. I am Mark O'Connell, and now we are live. This is your opportunity to get free legal advice from one of the best and brightest legal minds in the state of Wisconsin. So use the chat or the Q&A feature, and we'll take questions as you present them. While we are waiting for those questions, Andy, any update since you recorded this last week on court activity or Supreme Court decisions?
No, fortunately, there has not been an update in the last couple of weeks. We still are waiting for the decisions from the Supreme Court dealing with those very important issues surrounding state and local authority on health issues. So, and emergency declarations. So we'll continue to wait for the Supreme Court.
Okay, let's see. I am seeing currently nothing in the chat. Oh, here we go. Let's see. Andy, does the WCA have templates for virtual meeting ordinances, local health ordinances, along with enforceability?
In terms of the virtual meeting ordinances, no. WCA has published a couple of pieces that are guidance, more in the format of a question and answer format, that speak to some of the issues that we have seen as it relates to virtual meetings. I don't think that a template or a model ordinance is necessarily the right move, because I think different counties are going to do different things. And so I think having an understanding of the considerations and then working closely with Corporation Counsel to craft your board rules or your ordinances in a way that fits your particular needs is the best way to go as it relates to virtual meetings. As it relates to health ordinances, the Counties Association and I spent a lot of time together last summer analyzing, reviewing, comprehending, understanding, working with all sorts of different groups around the state to publish guidance as it relates to local health officer authority. That guidance can be found on Wisconsin Counties Association website. And that guidance does contain some template language as it relates to ordinances and forms and other materials to use. It also contains a comprehensive legal analysis. I know that we published an update to that guidance in October, and that update goes through a more specific enforcement process. And so, again, I think all the materials are there for others to see and digest, and then work with Corporation Counsel closely on crafting whatever ordinance and other forms or materials will be necessary to implement the specific provisions that you want at the local level.
We have a question from Ken in Door County. Andy, can you expand on what you meant by the ordinance for state of emergency? We already have the authority. Is there a model ordinance that is being suggested or drafted?
There's not a model ordinance, because I think counties are going to do it differently. And of course, we have three different forms of county government in terms of the executive branch, whether it be executive, administrator, or administrative coordinator. If you look at Chapter 323, there is some question about who gets to declare a state of emergency. I think a local ordinance helps clarify that, at least as it relates to the counties having a county executive. It's pretty clear the executive has that authority, but for the other counties, it's not entirely clear. And so we had questions about, is this a county board chair function? Is this an administrator function? Is it a joint function? And those are some of the questions that you can answer vis-a-vis local ordinance, is clarifying who has that responsibility and authority at the outset of an emergency. From there, we have to talk about continuity of governance and continuity of operations. And so who has the authority from a chain of command perspective to order resources and deploy them? And again, I think that's going to vary county by county, and depending upon the particular county, whether it be executive, administrator, or administrative coordinator, you're going to have different responses. So in Door County, where you have an administrator under 59.18, the administrator has the authority to control and supervise the department heads. And so I think it'd be appropriate for an administrator to take on that responsibility. Then the question becomes, do we have the administrator report to a particular committee, whether it be the executive committee or a designated emergency management committee? That's entirely up to a particular county. And so we don't have a model or a template, but essentially, if you want a list of considerations or want to talk through those considerations, that's certainly something we can look at down the line as you're putting together your ordinances.
Another question, Andy. How has the pandemic impacted the ability for boards to meet versus live, meet in person versus live, or via Zoom? And how has it impacted closed sessions if a virtual meeting is being conducted?
There's been a tremendous impact that the pandemic has created. The ability of boards to meet in person, committees to meet in person. We had all sorts of meetings all over the place all the time pre-pandemic. Now post-pandemic, we don't have the ability to get together in large groups, or at least there are a lot of people who feel unsafe in getting together in large groups. And so what do? It moved us into a virtual environment for many of these meetings. And with that comes challenges. Questions about closed session are a great example. How do we ensure that only the people who are allowed or permitted to be in a closed session are actually participating in the closed session? How do we do that in a virtual environment? Do we have to adjourn the meeting, reconvene it in closed session, then come back and reconvene an open session vis-a-vis the technology that we're using? In other words, end one Zoom call, hop on another Zoom call, get on the old Zoom call. How do we let the public know that we're getting back together? Because in an in-person meeting, we see people waiting in the hallway, and when the doors open, we know that the public is invited back into the meeting. So how do we do that in a virtual environment? Those are a lot of the questions that I know we've confronted over the course of the last year. Again, I know the Counties Association has guidance on that on its website in terms of the Q&A that we've put out on open meetings law compliance. I will note as well, the UW Extension Group has put on a series of webinars dealing with particular questions under the open meetings law and dealing with virtual environments, hybrid environments, and things of that nature. The second part of that is actually going to be conducted this Friday morning, and I'm one of the speakers at that. So I think these are issues we're going to continue to talk about. We're going to continue to get better at it. And then we're going to have board rules and ordinances that reinforce what it is that we do in order to meet our obligations under the open meetings law.
We have a question from Kim and Oconto regarding the any update on opioid litigation. And keep in mind, Andy, not everyone on the call is a client, so you can give us the, I guess, the plain vanilla version.
And the plain vanilla version is that we have been told that a settlement of some sort, at least with 1/3 of the defendants, and the defendants are divided into thirds. They are distributors, manufacturers, and then pharmacies. For lack of a better term, those are the general descriptions. We've been told that a settlement with the distributors, 1/3 of them, is imminent. I don't know what imminent really means, because I think we were advised of this through national media reports last August. And so if the definition of imminent is sometime within the next 8 months, I don't want anything, frankly, to be truly imminent in that way. And so we do anticipate, and as I understand it, in very broad terms at a high level, there is a meeting of the minds on amounts. There is a meeting of the minds on distribution out to states. There is somewhat of a meeting of the minds as it relates to how we are going to analyze the portion going to states versus local entities, whether they be counties, cities, or villages, or towns, or tribes. But there are several details that need to be worked through. As you might imagine, any lawsuit involving billions with a B dollars and multiple thousands of plaintiffs and multiple defendants, it's complicated. So there are still some details that are being ironed out. But we do have hope that at least there appears to be a meeting of the minds on all of the principal elements.
We will likely, Kim, we will likely require some sort of legislation on this matter, and we are in frequent contacts with legislative leadership and the Attorney General's office. So more to come on that issue. The good news is that the distributors have said, we didn't do anything wrong, but yes, we'll put money on the table, which bodes very well for the other 2/3 of the defendants. Andy, Larry from Waukesha asks, any idea why the state Supreme Court has not ruled on the governor's authority on health issues? Do they have any deadlines? And or are they just waiting until it's a moot point?
There are no deadlines. That's a good question. I think we could all speculate as to the reasons why. I think there is probably vigorous debate going on within the Supreme Court chambers as to how those decisions should actually be reached and what they should say. But I don't have any sort of insight as to why the delay would be there. And of course, as we delay, the uncertainty continues. And so as counties, we have to try to figure out how we're going to deal with this long term. The hope is, and I would love to say that the Supreme Court decisions become irrelevant once we have everybody, we have herd immunity, and we don't have to worry about this as a pandemic. I don't know how long that is going to take. And frankly, I don't know that I want to leave all of these questions unanswered, because as I mentioned in the recorded remarks, this isn't the last emergency we're going to face. And so I'd like to have some clarity when we get together as a county family and talk about how we respond to emergencies, how we deal with communicable disease. I'd like to have some clarity about roles and responsibilities.
Brian Hoffman asks, what can we as a county board do if we pass a health ordinance and our law enforcement officers do not enforce it?
Well, and that's a great question, because that's the situation that we faced with the governor's emergency orders early on, as we had several law enforcement officials indicating they weren't going to actively enforce the prescriptions that were contained within that emergency order. This is going back to March and April of 2020 last year. And so I think it's important, and we've talked about this since day one when the Counties Association put the stakeholder group together. It's very important to have your law enforcement professionals, your health officials, your county boards, your county administration, and the judicial branch all on the same page about how this particular order is going to be enforced. It's a very important question. there isn't a specific answer to say this is how you force your elected sheriff to enforce the law. You don't have that type of ability as a county. The sheriff is an independent constitutional officer who has the discretion to enforce laws or not enforce laws based on the sheriff's view of how the law ought to be enforced. And so it's very important to have the sheriff and his or her office at the table when you're discussing the particular boundaries of the order and how the order is going to be enforced.
We have a compliment and a question from Mark in Walworth. The information we receive from Andy Phillips is always very helpful. When previously at the municipal level, I often relied on a library of legal opinions that the League of Wisconsin Municipalities had prepared over the years and made available to members. Does the WCA have a parallel effort or library that is available to members? Andy, you want to start with that, and I'll jump into.
Yeah, well, thanks for the compliment, Mark. That's good to hear. We don't have a library currently. The library consists of the WCA's database of various opinions that have been provided over the years, and my database, frankly. As an aside, I think if we put a database or if we put a library like that together, I might look back on an opinion that I provided 20 years ago and think, what in the world was I thinking back then? So I'm a little bit hesitant to do that. That's a joke, by the way. I do have confidence that we were right 20 years ago, but we've discussed at some point organizing some of these opinions and some of these thoughts, and I think we're getting better at it. You saw that with the COVID-19 package. That was all self-contained on WCA's website. Everything that we did and put out was contained on WCA's website, and that was fantastic. So we've talked about that over the years, and I think at some point we will start putting that together in a more organized fashion.
One thing we do at the association, Mark, is that when a question comes in of a legal nature that affects more than one county, and we talk with Andy about it, if we have done work in the past, we'll review that to ensure that the legal advice is still relevant today, and then and relay that to the counties or make modifications in it. But we do not put the generally opinions by Andy or other legal firms on the website. But certainly, if you have an issue, call our office, and whatever we have available, we'll try to share. We have a question on whether there is an update in writing regarding the opioid case that one could access. Nothing in writing. I guess the short answer is no, there is not. But it does raise another issue, and Andy, we should talk with Aaron Dickinson of Kruger Dickinson, the primary attorney on the case. Perhaps we should have another get-together with the plaintiffs so we can provide an update. We'll put that into the mix.
We'll make a note of that. Good point.
At this time, I see nothing else in the Q&A or in the chat. So let me thank you, Andy Phillips, as General Counsel, and quite frankly, I think the smartest local government mind in the state of Wisconsin. And we are very happy and proud to have you as General Counsel of the Wisconsin Counties Association. With that,
thank you, Mark, and thank you, everybody.
Let me turn it over to my colleague, Anne Marie Austin.
When you have a vision, nothing stands in your way. Resourcefulness unravels complexity. Diversity strengthens bonds. Diligence heralds change. And soon, a sustainable tomorrow takes shape. The result of curiosity, agility, ingenuity, fearlessness, bringing you a step closer to a final destination of flight.
PFM, advice for people transforming their world.
Good morning, and thank you for inviting me to your meeting today. I always look forward to meeting with WCA, and I'm just sorry that we're not meeting in person. I hope the next time we'll be in person. I know that 2020 was a difficult year for Wisconsin counties, and 2021 hasn't been a whole lot better. I do want to thank WCA for the work that it's done to help our counties weather this storm. The county administrators and the county board supervisors and the staff, thanks to them for finding a way to keeping everything moving forward despite these rather extraordinary challenges. And thanks to WCA for all that they are doing to build understanding of the value of extension and to keep its programs going in the midst of this pandemic. Here at UW-Madison, we have faced some of the same challenges that you are facing and a few challenges that are unique to the university. So I want to share with you some of the budget initiatives that I hope you'll be hearing more about over this coming spring, and that I hope you'll help us advocate for. But first, let me give you a quick update of what's been happening around the university. So even in a historically challenging time, there's always good news to share at UW-Madison. Let me start by noting that we continue to be quite a hot school for applications. We set a new record for freshman applications this last month. They are up 16% over last year. I think that's the 10th year in a row our applications have increased. They've doubled in the last 10 years. And those increases are both in-state and out-of-state, although historically the increase has been bigger out-of-state. We are now one of 10 public universities in the country in terms of our 6-year graduation rates, 10 top public universities in terms of 6-year graduation rates. And we've reduced time to graduation. Now, time to graduation matters for a lot of reasons, but one of them means reduced debt. A lot of students acquire debt if they stay an extra semester or an extra year. This past spring, 57% of our graduating seniors graduated with 0 student debt. Now, I know you hear a lot about the student debt crisis in the country. I just want to tell you, at your flagship university, there is not a student debt crisis, and indeed close to 60% of our students graduate with no debt at all. We have also substantially increased scholarship aid over the last 5 to 6 years. This is something I've particularly been pretty passionate about and have been raising money for. That means we can expand access to low-income Wisconsin students. I'm particularly proud of a program that is now 3 years old called Bucky's Tuition Promise. And Bucky's Tuition Promise essentially says, if you can get into UW-Madison, and you come from a family in the bottom half of the income distribution in Wisconsin, that means your family income is $62,000 or less. We will guarantee that we will put together all of the scholarship and the scholarship aid you need to cover all tuition and fees for 4 years. So we're essentially promising you can come to school tuition free if you are a lower income Wisconsin student. And that's been really important for us to be recruiting lots of great students from all over the state. I'm proud of the quality of education and the research at UW-Madison, but COVID has made this year a particularly difficult one. When the pandemic hit nearly a year ago, we sent students and most employees home. We changed our entire instructional mode inside of 10 days, and we redesigned 8,000 classes from in-person to online. Now, some of that worked a little better than others, and when we reopened in the fall, we had done a lot of training to make sure that those online classes in the fall really were prepared and ready to run. Among the many things we did, we reconfigured the ventilation systems in virtually all of our buildings. We purchased nearly 2 million masks and 7,300 gallons of hand sanitizer. And of course, we stood up systems for testing, for quarantine, for isolation space. Lots of people at the beginning of fall semester told us this wouldn't work. And I'm happy to say that we proved them wrong. There was a spike in cases at the beginning of the semester. We took some pretty immediate and rather strong measures about that. And by about the 22nd or 23rd of September, our infection rates were low, and they stayed low until the present moment, I will say. Indeed, throughout the fall and the winter, our positivity rates have been below Dane County, and in turn, far below the state for a number of those months. We're now well into spring semester, and we have greatly expanded our testing. We couldn't have done this last August when we started, but we've worked hard all fall so that now we require that everyone has to test twice a week if you're an undergraduate student. We have an app called the Safer Badgers app. By the time I pull it up on here, everybody has it. You take your test, and it shows up as a badge in this app, and the badge has to be green. If you are up to date on your testing and your tests were negative, you have to show a green badge to get into any building on campus. That's basically a way to guarantee that we are keeping track of infection rates. They're staying low. We're testing everyone frequently enough that we know things are under control, and you can see this through the semester. Our numbers have stayed quite low. Now, none of this has been easy, and none of it has been particularly cheap. Our COVID-related expenses, the cost of all of the things we've done around healthcare are approaching $50 million. But That's been necessary to keep our campus safe and to make sure that we catch infections, not just to control them on our campus, but to control them throughout the entire community. The best news this semester is that we have begun vaccinations. UW-Madison is an official vaccinator. To date, we've given more than 7,000 shots to those who are eligible in the current tiering. And I hope over the course of this semester, we're going to be able to vaccinate all of our faculty and staff. We are also working with the local healthcare providers and with the public schools to be a vaccinator, reaching out to the K-12 teachers as soon as in the state we're allowed to start that. And that's going to be March 1st. And I think you're probably meeting after the 1st of March, but as I'm talking today, we aren't quite at that point. After we get all of our faculty and staff vaccinated, my next goal next fall is any student who arrives on campus who has not yet been vaccinated needs to get a vaccination from us. If we can do that, if we can vaccinate our community by the beginning of fall semester, we will have a reasonably normal fall semester. And that is what we are aiming for. So in addition, of course, to educating and keeping safe thousands of students, we're also running one of the 10 largest research institutions in the country. And we've entirely rearranged all the ways in which our laboratories work to make sure we can operate them safely as well. Now, our faculty jumped into COVID-related research, and you won't be surprised to know the federal government has put a lot of money out there to fund and support people who want to research different aspects of either the disease, how we treat it, and or its impacts on various populations. We have, in just 10 months, brought in over $50 million in funding for COVID-related projects. For instance, our faculty are developing better treatments for people who are hospitalized, working to understand these new strains of the virus, designing systems for equitable vaccine distribution, and studying the effects of COVID in communities of color. The public health crisis and its interrelated economic crisis have made the work of our Division of Extension more important than ever. When the Cooperative Extension Program moved back to its original home here at UW-Madison over 2 years ago, we knew we had an opportunity to deepen and to broaden the work of both institutions. But we had no idea at that point quite how vital that work would become very quickly. Over the past year, when counties were faced with questions of what to do with dairy and farm products in the face of market upheaval, Extension staff worked side by side with university researchers to come up with solutions, including direct assistance to farmers. When families faced unemployment and were uncertain how they were going to pay the mortgage or put food on their table, we worked to help them find assistance and to manage their budgets. And when communities had questions about the best way to communicate emergency orders to residents, we helped provide answers to that as well. The governor's budget, which was just announced very recently, near the end of February, includes new funding to support extension, exactly as the Board of Regents had requested. Among other things, the proposal does the following. Additional faculty extension specialists will be in the College of Agriculture and Life Sciences at UW-Madison and who will work directly with farmers on new technologies to address a variety of problems. Additional regionally based extension specialists focusing on multiple areas, from cranberry to vegetable farming, to water quality, to improving healthcare in Wisconsin's rural counties. And continued state funding for the Dairy Innovation Hub, which was part of the budget 2 years ago, and which is a collaboration between UW-Madison, UW-Platteville, and UW-River Falls. The Dairy Hub is bringing in federal research grants and private funding. It's helping us recruit top talent and build some high impact research and outreach programs that focus on helping Wisconsin to continue to produce the highest quality dairy products in a way that is sustainable, both economically and environmentally. For instance, one project is designing a user-friendly mobile app to help farmers apply fertilizer in a way that minimizes costs and environmental impacts. Another project is exploring the health benefits of yogurt and other fermented milk products to help producers develop and promote new foods. It is wonderful to see these projects take shape and to think about the future projects that we can do. I'm very grateful to Governor Evers for supporting new positions in CALS and in Extension, and for putting forth a budget that will help us recover from the effects of this pandemic more quickly and return to the classroom in the fall. And I very much hope that you will help us advocate, now that the budget has gone to the legislature, for keeping those expansions to extension in the budget when it gets passed this coming summer. UW-Madison is facing a lot of financial issues. We estimate from when this pandemic started a year ago, March, through the end of this fiscal year, which is the end of June of 2021, we have lost $320 $320 million compared to what we would have estimated a year ago. That includes a lapse of $51 million in state funding that was supposed to support, among other things, the Dairy Hub, and we have continued to fund that by cutting other things. Our staff and faculty are taking a full year of monthly furlough days, and we've been implementing budget cuts across UW-Madison in response to the financial losses. As you know, many of you, our athletic program has taken a $50 million hit over the year, as has our housing. And we've had to respond quickly to reduce expenses in order to deal with that. A budget cut to UW system schools this next year, on top of the pandemic effects, would be devastating. But the good news is the governor's budget actually proposes a very generous expansion in funding for UW system schools across the board. And now, again, that is shifted to the legislature to be debated in the legislature. While I know the pandemic has been devastating to Wisconsin counties, I am very committed to making sure that through the Extension Service, through CALS, through our vet school, through our School of Public Health, that we continue the university support for all of the work that we do together in partnership. I am looking forward to continuing to work with the governor and with leaders in the legislature as we move through this budget process. I hope you'll all stand with us to advocate for a state budget that invests in the UW system and that allows us to continue to expand our important work in partnership with Extension, with Wisconsin counties, and with Wisconsin communities. I do hope that if you have questions, issues, ideas, things you want to talk about, don't hesitate to reach out. Reach out to me, reach out to your local Extension people, reach out to any other leaders that you might have contact with. I look forward to us continuing to work together. I look forward to us moving towards a new normal sometime before the end of 2021. Thank you all.
Wisconsin Counties Association General Counsel Von Briesen and Roper has stood alongside Wisconsin county government during a pandemic which has rocked our state and nation. The attorneys at Von Briesen and Roper worked closely with WCA to navigate the constantly changing landscape of COVID-19 and its impact on counties. From daily briefings early on to leading webinars on timely topics, they have helped counties weather the unprecedented storm and have kept our state moving forward.
It has been our privilege to partner with Wisconsin counties as they continue to meet the critical needs of our citizens during the pandemic while operating in a constantly changing environment. We're honored to be a part of the county family and definitely look forward to the future.
Good morning. So happy to be here talking with you this morning. I'm Dale Knapp, the WCA Director of Research and Analytics and the Director of Forward Analytics, the research arm of the Wisconsin Counties Association. I wish we could be together in person, but we find ways to make do during these trying times. This morning, I'm going to spend a few minutes talking about the economic damage that COVID has caused in our state. I'm going to look at where we are now and what might lie ahead. This is all based on a report that we put out in January called The COVID Economy. It's available on our website at forward-analytics.net, or you can go to the WCA website and link to Forward Analytics and see it. And I've updated some of the data for this presentation because, as we know, this is sort of an evolving situation. So let me start with a big picture summary of what we're looking at. Three events that were really unprecedented in terms of magnitude occurred last spring. The first is the decline in GDP. So gross domestic product is the broadest measure of Wisconsin's economy. Second quarter, we saw the largest decline on record. Now, this is not the largest overall decline in GDP, but the largest decline in that short of a period of time. The largest surge in unemployment claims that we've ever seen, and we know that the Department of Workforce Development was swamped and had really struggled with processing those claims. And we also had the largest federal stimulus ever. And for the most part, it was very effective, as we'll see, in limiting the economic damage. Since that big surge down, we have seen recovery. We've seen slow and steady progress, although we are seeing some indications that that progress stalled out last fall and early winter. This was a downturn that really affected low-income households much more than any other sector of the population. And then we're going to look at 2021, and there are some reasons to be optimistic as we look forward. So let's look at that initial shock. So what we're talking about here is generally from mid-March through May was the bulk of the initial shock. Some of these numbers we're going to be looking at a little bit longer time period because, for example, for GDP, the downturn really started in April, and so we saw some overall decline in first quarter GDP. The big downturn, 9.4% in the second quarter. So the first half of 2020, our GDP was down 11.4% from the fourth quarter of 2019. To put that into some perspective, only 8 states had larger declines in terms of GDP. So the downturn really hit Wisconsin very hard initially. When we look at jobs, the number of jobs in April were down 15% from February, the largest 2-month drop on record. And I think when we look at unemployment claims, that really puts it in terms of people, in terms of the number of people that were affected. So for just a 6-week period, mid-March through May, 440,000 Wisconsinites filed initial claims for unemployment. That's 15.6% of those who were employed in February. So, a really big downturn, and unemployment claims soaring, and really unemployment claims continued to be at near record numbers for quite a number of weeks after that, even after May. Now, despite all of this damage, it could have been much, much worse. What we are looking at in Wisconsin was what I call an $18 billion cushion. Essentially, this was the result of the Federal CARES Act. And what I'm focusing on is 3 components here. The PPP loans, which were loans to generally small businesses to help keep workers on their payrolls during that initial part of the pandemic. And those loans could be forgiven if they were used for payroll and a few other things. So $9.9 billion infused into Wisconsin's economy in terms of the PPP loans. The economic impact payments, the $1,200 payments per individual that occurred mostly in April, May, and a little bit in June, added $5.1 billion to the state's economy. And the additional $600 per week in unemployment benefits, federal unemployment benefits, added about $2.7 billion to the state's economy during the second quarter of 2020. So one way to really show the impact here is to look at what's called personal income. Personal income is another broad measure of the state's economy. It generally follows GDP, but rather than personal income falling in the second quarter like GDP did, it actually rose 8%. So a big turnaround in terms of personal income. And what we're going to see is that really supported spending. It supported, it kept people in their jobs. So it really helped support the economy and lessened the damage that could have happened. Now, the questions that were occurring at that time were, what kind of a recession was this going to be? Was it going to be a sharp move down like we saw, and then a sharp rebound up, what was so-called V recession? Was it going to be U-shaped in terms of it goes down, it stays low for a while, and then begins to rebound? It's looking more and more like, I would call it the square root recession, in that it declined, it came back down, it came back up partially, and now has sort of flattened out, sort of moved flat to the right. So again, looking at some of the measures that I just talked about, GDP rose 8.8% in the third quarter. Again, a big rebound, but it remained 3.6% below pre-pandemic levels. And given Wisconsin GDP grows relatively slowly, we're still a ways away from being back to quote unquote normal. In fact, the Department of Revenue in their November report, they're not expecting GDP to get back to pre-pandemic levels until 2022. So we've got a ways to go if their predictions are right. Same thing with jobs. Jobs began climbing after the steep downturn. They climbed all the way through September and then declined slightly in October and November. And in fact, the August and September growth numbers were actually relatively anemic. So what we were seeing at the end of the year, again, was a rebound and a stalling out. And again, going back to the Department of Revenue's report, they don't expect overall job numbers to get back to pre-pandemic levels until 2023. So again, a long way to go. Looking at what sectors were hit the hardest, overall, as of December, if we look at job numbers relative to where they were in February, pre-pandemic, all jobs were still 7% below where we were. But the industries that we know were hit the hardest are significantly down from where they were pre-pandemic. The arts and entertainment industry down 38%. The accommodation industry, hotels and motels, still down 35% from pre-pandemic levels. Restaurants and bars down 2.3%. And even manufacturing, which we don't think about a lot in terms of the impacts that it had on manufacturing, but continues to remain 2% below pre-pandemic levels. And the arts and entertainment, accommodation, the food service industries, you'll see we're going to be coming back to those continuously, because again, the nature of this pandemic and the recession really wreaked havoc in those industries. More broadly, it was really small business that got hit the hardest. We have some data from researchers at Harvard University that have been tracking both in Wisconsin and across the country some of these indicators in almost current time. As of February 4th, they're estimating that the number of small businesses in Wisconsin that were open still down 23% from January of 2020. And if we look at a a different sector, the restaurant owners. So CERT November survey of restaurant owners, 37% of Wisconsin restaurant owners in November thought there was a good chance they were going to be out of business within 6 months without some help. In particular, they were looking at federal assistance. So a really, not a bright picture for small business and in particular for restaurant owners. Now, the industries that we talked about, the accommodation industry, the food service industry, arts and entertainment, they employ a lot of workers that are at the lower end of the pay scale. And so while recessions generally hit low-wage workers a little bit harder than everybody else, it's particularly bad this time. So this, again, goes back to the Harvard data. And what they've been doing is tracking jobs in terms of what they call low-wage, moderate wage, and high-wage jobs. The cutoffs being an average of $27,000 a year, an average of $60,000 a year. So those are the cutoffs that define these groups. And what you see here, the orange bar, the low-income, low-wage workers, in April, down 33% from where they were in January. A huge drop. And again, it goes back to the accommodation and restaurant industries. We see the rebound that I talked about over the summer, but even then, they only got back to about 12% below where they were in January, and that has eroded as we've moved through the fall and into the winter. So by November, those low-wage jobs still almost 19% below where they were in January. And again, compare that to the high-wage jobs. High-wage jobs took a little bit of a hit early on, but then by November are actually up over where they were in January. And that makes some sense. High-wage jobs are generally white-collar type jobs that the ability to work from home is really, has allowed employers to keep, those workers on the payroll, again, because of the technology that we have. Now, with low-wage workers, again, being hit the hardest, these are the residents, the workers in the state that can least afford to be laid off. They don't have the savings built up to cover a layoff, especially for a long time period. And so what we can do is we can look at a couple of measures that show this impact on the low-income families. Researchers at the University of Chicago have been looking at poverty rate data. So generally, poverty rate numbers don't come out for a couple of years. They're looking at the Census Bureau survey on a monthly basis and calculating for the US what poverty rates are. And what they're seeing is that as of January, the US had a poverty rate of 10.8%. With the Fed stimulus, they actually saw poverty go down, in the late spring and early summer. But as the Fed stimulus moved on, we're seeing a big surge. And as of December, they're estimating that national poverty is at 11.8%. So a full 1 percentage point jump in poverty is really a big annual jump. We don't have the Wisconsin numbers in terms of poverty, but one of the things we can look at is food share cases. So these are low-income families that need help and in terms of buying groceries, look for help in the food share program. Now, this program, cases had been declining steadily since 2013. 2013, we had over 800,000 cases of food share. By February of 2020, we were down under 600,000. So a long, steady decline in food share cases. However, in just a very short time, from February to December of 2020, the food share cases rose from that under 600 to 738,000 cases. So we're seeing this in Wisconsin in terms of the impact on low-income households as we see food share cases rise and really rise significantly. Now, that's what's been going on at the state level. And, I know as county officials, you want to kind of know what's going on in your county. And it's a little bit difficult because a lot of the data is not available at the county level. So what we can do is we can take some of the county data that we have and get some sense of where the impacts were the greatest and where they were the least. And so what we did is we looked at the average unemployment rate from April through November and how that changed from the same period in 2019. So what we see are the darker orange counties are where in terms of unemployment anyway, where the impact was the largest. The darkest orange unemployment rates were at least 7 percentage points higher than the year ago. So we're looking at Douglas, Iron, Forest, Menominee, and Jackson counties. And then 3 of the not quite as dark orange counties, Milwaukee, Sauk, and Adams, their unemployment rate 6 percentage points higher than a year ago. So those counties were the counties that were hit the hardest. If you look at all of the shades of orange, the one pattern that you do see is that, northern Wisconsin, the very northern part of the state, was really hit the hardest, with some pockets on the west and west central parts of the state. The least affected counties, the very dark green, were interesting. They were all very rural counties, Rusk, Taylor, Clark, Kewanee, and Lafayette. Their unemployment, while it rose less than 3% on average over the period. So there's other than the northernmost counties being hit the hardest, there's not really any other pattern that we're able to discern yet in terms of where we are. Spending shifts, what we're looking at is some interesting patterns happened, in terms of spending. Overall activities down just 2.3%. We expected much bigger numbers from in March. People turned to online buying. Online buying up 92% from a year ago. People with some of the money that they weren't spending in bars and restaurants and vacations, were doing home improvement products. So their building material garden stores were up 15%. And there's this shift to buy local, is what we'll talk about here in a second. The industries that we talked about earlier, hotel, motel, arts, entertainment, restaurant, bars, spending there cut significantly. So with those shifts in spending patterns, sales tax distributions really surprised. The vast majority of counties actually saw increased sales tax collections over the year, led by some counties in the Northwest, which were up 12 to 15% year over year. And that goes to that online spending and the buy local. So it looks like residents weren't going to the urban shopping malls to make purchases anymore. They were buying at their local stores in their local communities. We only saw 4 counties with declines. The 2 largest counties in the state, Milwaukee and Dane, and then Sauk and Monroe counties had declines. Monroe's was very, very small. So some good news for counties in terms of sales taxes. There was a big concern about sales taxes really being hit hard. That didn't occur. So looking ahead, there is a lot of good news. The number of COVID cases has been really declining fairly steadily since mid-November. You know, in mid-November, the average number of cases over 7 days was over 6,500. As of mid-February, we're down to 767. So a big decline, you know, in the average number of daily cases. We've got the vaccine rolling out, which again is good news. My one concern that could delay the recovery and really stall it some more is the new COVID strains, particularly the British strain, which is much more contagious than the strains we've been dealing with. Should that take hold, we could see, you know, another surge in cases, which again would stall the recovery. But for the most part, we've got good news heading into 2021, though as the Department of Revenue numbers indicate, we still got a ways to go to get back to where we were pre-pandemic. So with that, thank you for your time. I hope everybody had a good conference, and with that, we'll open it up to questions.
You have just watched a pre-recorded presentation put forth by Dale Knapp, Director of Forward Analytics, and my colleague at the Counties Association, and I would also add one of the most respected minds in all of research. We are now opening this up for live question and answer on this topic or anything, any report that Dale has authored in the past year or so. Let's see, we have one question. Are COVID infections dropping, Dale?
Yes, as I mentioned, you know, when I taped it, that we were down to about 700 on average cases per week. The most recent numbers were down statewide to about 650 per week. So we continue to decline, which has been really good news. There's this steady progress down, and we're seeing, you know, some counties gradually beginning to open up. You know, Dane County just eased some of their restrictions. So they're seeing the same thing that we're seeing.
There's a question about whether the presentation will be available. It will be available, I believe, on the website, also on Wisconsin Eye. And Michelle, perhaps you can put something in the chat for a link. Okay, here we have another question. Dale, a couple of them. With the potential for federal funding, do you have recommendations on areas to focus on with these funds?
Well, I don't have any recommendations because we're going to have to wait really to see what's going to be allowed. It's still kind of up in the air what, you know, where counties are going to be able to spend the money. So once we get that guidance, then we'll kind of know where we can focus it. And I think every county is going to be a little bit different in terms of where their needs are the most.
And let me supplement Dale's answer too, Mark. We're talking about the federal funding that would come into the state, which would mean roughly $1.1 billion distributed to counties directly from federal treasury if the $1.9 trillion federal package passes. The question is, as Dale alluded to, what can we spend it on? The language in the legislation is somewhat vague. It will be clarified with federal treasury guidance. We have asked for that federal treasury guidance language to be made as broad as possible, so we're able to expend it on many items. I would encourage counties, however, to expend the dollars. These are one-time dollars on either one-time projects or something that would likely generate increased economic activity in the future. So you have ongoing benefit. For example, the tourism arena might be something you very much would like to spend dollars on, which will have a lasting positive impact on your county or area. Another question, Dale. Are any projections on business for the summer? Will the outdoor surge continue?
Well, when I wrote the report and it got published in January, I wasn't terribly optimistic. Again, we were just seeing that British strain show up in the U.S., and that was really worrisome. With cases steadily declining, and the federal government just announced that by early May, we may have enough vaccines to essentially vaccinate the population. I'm much more optimistic about what this summer looks like, and I think the tourism industry, especially northern Wisconsin, those businesses need to be open this summer. So I think in a lot of cases we can't afford another summer being shut down. So I'm more and more optimistic about what this summer looks like.
Another question, Dale. Do the policies of our border states have a significant impact on Wisconsin's sales tax revenues or travel restrictions?
Well, I think, in terms of sales tax revenues, and we don't know, exactly where purchases are being made, but it looks like, when you look at where the sales taxes were, the activity was highest over the year before was the Northwest counties bordering Minneapolis. And so, my guess is that there was a lot of movement from the Minneapolis area to those counties, which boosted the sales tax revenues there. Otherwise, it's really hard to track exactly where the people are coming from that are making those purchases.
As part of the recovery, do you see the sales tax remaining level or correcting back down to before COVID levels?
Well, and this is the good and bad news for the especially for the counties that saw the big increases. So this year, their last year, 2020, you saw a big increase. I see it beginning to correct back to sort of the patterns we saw in 2019 in terms of sales, not all the way back. So, some of those counties, I think you're going to see declines in sales taxes compared to this year, but you'll still be up from 2019.
Another question, Dale. Nationally, people talk about the she session, meaning the pandemic has impacted women particularly hard. Is that also true in Wisconsin?
Well, see, some of these numbers we don't have for Wisconsin. So a lot of times on these things, there's data nationally, but not for Wisconsin. And we'll probably have that data later on. We do know it's as I mentioned, it's impacted low income workers disproportionately. There's some evidence that it's disproportionately impacted minority populations because especially business owners, their businesses are disproportionately in the restaurant industry, the industries that were hit the hardest. So we're seeing some evidence of that.
From Colleen in Eau Claire, your research indicates that cash infusions saved a lot of folks. How does that mesh with legislative unwillingness to support increased funding for longer similar efforts in the governor's budget?
Well, there's two things at work here. One is the federal government can deficit spend. So that's why we're seeing the ability to do those cash infusions. Now, at some point, we think those are going to have to be paid off. Whether they will, we don't know. Wisconsin has to operate on a balanced budget. So, in order to do those kinds of programs, they would have to generate more revenue initially. And so that's always been the challenge at the state level, is that that you can't deficit spend. So if you don't want to raise taxes, then you can't do some of those things. So there's that back and forth on spending equals revenues.
From the chairman in Waukesha, workforce development centers are seeing fewer applicants for current jobs. With more people getting vaccinated and businesses hopefully reopening, do you think people who dropped out will come back into the employment arena?
Yes, I do. Because there's a couple of reasons. One is that there'll be more comfort coming back, into the job market. But remember, we had a significant labor shortage heading into this, and we're even though unemployment is relatively high right now. It's going to get back down once things normalize to that labor shortage, which is going to put pressure on wages, which we saw prior to the pandemic. And that pressure on wages will attract a lot of people back into the workforce.
From Mark in Bayfield, we have heard a great deal about the lost education opportunities for our youth. Are there projections about how this will impact counties in the years ahead? Do you have recommendations for counties regarding this loss?
That is one of my really big concerns is what are the long-term impacts of that? We just don't know at this point. We don't know what those long-term impacts are going to be, and how big they're going to be. So it's something that we just have to continue to monitor and try to figure out who's impacted, and what those impacts are, and try to remediate as fast as we can, to some degree. But it's not too early to start thinking about it, but we don't have enough data yet to really make any suggestions there.
Another question, Dale. Are you aware of county level data sources regarding property tax late payments during the preceding 12 months?
That I don't. In fact, I talked to the Department of Revenue trying to get some information on property tax payments by industry or various measures of property tax, and just a lot of that isn't tracked. And so, I don't have that, no. And I don't know where we would find that unless, you surveyed counties or, and again, that's going to be something that we're going to see, coming into this year. But I don't know of a source there yet. And if we get that data, we'll certainly get it out.
From the chairman in Fond du Lac, what are your thoughts on ways counties can hit or help the most hard hit industries, particularly entertainment, restaurants, hospitality, and the like?
Well, let me just say, one of the things I kind of wish would have happened at the federal level would have been, in the December stimulus and this one was a better targeting of the industries that we know were hardest hit. The first stimulus with the CARES Act, we were doing that in a lot of uncertainty, and so we understand that shotgun kind of approach. I think by December we knew where the damage was, and I wish we would have seen more targeting there. I think the federal government has more of the resources to be able to do that. At the county level, I think that's something that depending again on what's allowed under the new stimulus, that may be some money there that counties can use to help those businesses within their boundaries. And again, that's going to depend on what the rules are.
Dale, do you have any data on why COVID infections are dropping?
There's speculation. We don't know. There were a lot more mask mandates. As we went along, those obviously helped to some degree. We had, as you have more people having had COVID, there's some immunity there. So all of that works together. I'm not an epidemiologist. I haven't really dug into exactly what's the real big main driving force behind the reductions.
Dale, when will you have data available about the true impact of COVID on demographics? In other words, when will we have numbers that clearly indicate how how large an impact COVID had on deaths?
Well, we do have it at the national level. So one of the best, the initial way to look at it is essentially look at what are called excess deaths. So the number of deaths generally follows a fairly smooth pattern. And so you can look at sort of how deaths rank up in one year versus another. Now, we have to be a little bit careful with that because we also know that there were fewer deaths by, by other means. So it's going to be tricky, but I think we'll have a general sense within a year or so what the number is. But if you look, there are some national numbers out there that look at excess deaths, and that gives you a crude number. And those numbers actually line up pretty close with the death numbers that are put out by the CDC.
Switching gears for a moment, Dale, I personally enjoy our high-minded intellectual discussions that we have about everything. Along those lines, could you touch upon what I've been hearing in the news lately, this new economic theory called modern economic theory?
Oh, modern monetary theories, I think, yeah.
Yeah.
So it's been around for a while, but it's gotten it's sort of gotten some a new push over the last couple of years, and effectively it deals with the idea of federal government debt and spending, and the 20,000 foot view of this is essentially is that deficits don't matter for the most part. Now there's a point at which they matter, but we're not at that point yet. And so essentially that the idea is that the focus on government debt is limiting us in terms of what we can do at the federal government in terms of federal spending, that we could spend more and let the debt grow, and at some point there would be some impacts, but especially because the US is the reserve currency, the dollar is, that the growing deficit doesn't matter as much as we think it does.
And I want to clarify for our listeners and those who've tuned in, this is not a theory that Dale Knapp subscribes to. You're just describing it. We have a $20 trillion plus economy, and in $20 trillion of federal debt that we count, really more like 80 trillion when we count our known obligations. So this is not, Dale's just explaining the theory, not ascribing to it. Any final comments, Dale? We have no other questions in the Q&A in the chat. Any parting comments you'd like to make?
I don't. I would, as always, in terms of the research that we're doing, if you have interesting ideas or questions that would make for a research topic, please let me know. I can't say that they're all going to happen, but a lot of times the best research ideas come from people on the ground and at counties or wherever on things that are going on there. And so, if good research ideas, just let me know.
And where can people find all of the reports that you have produced?
It can be found at forward-analytics.net, or just now go to the WCA homepage, and there's a link to Forward Analytics right there on the front page.
Forward-analytics.net or wicounties.org. This concludes our legislative exchange. I thank you very much for attending. I want to thank the board of directors and our chairman, Lance Plimmel, for leading the way and being a guiding light as we try to influence public policy to the benefit of county government. On behalf of all of the staff of the association, and in particular, I'd like to thank Anne Marie Austin, who put together all of the electronics, did all of the filming, with the assistance of Michelle Thompson and the assistance of Cheryl Fleck, who oversees this entire event. Anne-Marie, you did just a spectacular job, highly professional, very polished. Did all of the filming with Tommy Thompson, with Governor Evers, with the Legislative Roundtable, all the transitions in and out, and made this seem, quite frankly, flawless. Thank you, Anne-Marie. Thank you to the membership. We are so proud to work for county government, my colleagues and I, and we look forward to doing more good work for county government in the future. Thank you for joining the Wisconsin Counties Association Legislative Exchange.